Did you know? Some of the textures used for E105 Zeta actually have Dreamcast consoles on them hidden in plain sight. This was likely a later addition during development, as Sonic Adventure wasn't originally a Dreamcast game at all. One of the earliest ideas for the game was a Sonic RPG on the Sega Saturn, but the RPG concept was quickly scrapped. However, the thought of giving the game a stronger emphasis on story, similar to what could be found in an RPG, stuck. Sonic Team decided to stay true to the series' platforming action and rework traditional 2D Sonic mechanics and features into 3D. One example of this is the homing attack, which was introduced to replicate the feeling of easily charging at and bouncing off enemies like in 2D Sonic games. As we mentioned in a previous episode, development of Sonic Adventure jumped to the Dreamcast because the Saturn was becoming a commercial failure. We also mentioned that the game's earlier builds were reworked into the Sonic World segments of Sonic Jam. What wasn't mentioned, however, was just how far into development the Saturn art assets were used. There exists Japanese gameplay footage of Sky Chase Act 2 that uses Sonic and Tails models from the Sega Saturn build. Because of how similar the sequence is to its final iteration, it seems to be running on Dreamcast hardware. Another element we mentioned in a previous video was the possibility of Tighe originally being a playable character, as using a moon jump cheat code can make her jump in the game's cutscenes. Since then, more information has developed showing that both Tighe and Dr. Eggman were partially programmed to be playable and can be selected via hacking. Both characters can only walk around and jump, and they can't interact with enemies and obstacles. In order to research environments for Sonic Adventure, Sonic Team organized a trip to Central and South America. None of the developers had ever seen genuine ruins and jungles before, and tools like the internet were too primitive at the time to find reliable references. The team wanted to make the game world as believable as they possibly could, even going as far as to use their own photographs as textures in the game. Tails' Sandhill subgame was inspired by people boarding on sand dunes in Ica, Peru. Sonic Team weren't even aware the sport existed and were so impressed that they included it in the final game. Another notable shift in the game's development was the inclusion of the often criticized E102 Gamma segments. What's interesting is that these levels were included by fan request. Sonic fans appealed to Sega, asking them to incorporate some sort of shooting mechanic into the series. Sega wanted to satisfy their audience, but felt the shooting gun didn't fit Sonic's character. Sonic Team's solution was to create a new armed character, possibly based on Egg Robo from Sonic and Knuckles. Sega also included a different kind of fan service. In the original Japanese release of Sonic Adventure, a mechanical cowgirl billboard could be seen within Casinopolis, and a moaning sound would play whenever the player touched it. This was replaced with a generic sign in international versions of the game for obvious reasons. This version, however, was also toned down from the Sonic Adventure auto demo prototype. In this version, the girl was a fully fleshed out Playboy-style bunny with a minibar. To take advantage of and showcase the Dreamcast power, the team wanted to create a villain that could never have been rendered on previous consoles. In the words of director Takashi Iizuka, "I wanted to create an enemy that hadn't been possible until now. I wanted something bigger, something transparent and liquid, because technology now allowed for it. I wanted something that would wow the users." Chaos is seen from the very beginning of the game to make the graphical leap obvious, and was even included in the opening movie sequence. When Chaos was first designed, the concept art was shown to Sonic creator Yuji Naka. Naka liked the drawing so much that he approved them on the spot. The look of Perfect Chaos was changed in Sonic Generations. It was later explained that this is how Chaos was originally intended to appear, but Sonic Team weren't able to achieve that exact look due to the technical restrictions of the Dreamcast. In Sonic Adventure, Sega had to settle for Perfect Chaos's body being made completely out of water, which was still something unthinkable in the days of the Sega Saturn. The direct inspiration for Chaos's concept and presentation is uncertain. In Greek mythology, Chaos was the name of the first deity to come into existence, and is described as vast and formless. Chaos is put forth as a godlike creature in the game, and one of his key features is changing forms. However, Chaos could have another more scientific inspiration. There's a close relative of the amoeba called Chaos. These organisms can change form, are mostly translucent, and have a noticeable opaque blotch in them accompanied by smaller mitochondria floating around. This seems very similar to Sonic's Chaos, especially how he was depicted in concept and promotional art. Although his real-life origins are ambiguous, Sega have explained Chaos's virtual beginnings on their Japanese website. Chaos is actually a mutated Chao. The Chao themselves were a progression of a feature from Nights into Dreams called A-Life. A-Life involved artificial life forms called Nighttopians, which could be merged with other creatures and even bred. The game kept track of the moods of the Nighttopians, which would alter the tempo, pitch, and melody of the music depending on the state of the Nighttopians within a level. Sega wanted to take this idea of nurturing a creature that grew with the player and migrate it into Sonic Adventure to break up the pace of the game. Not only did they want to mix up the gameplay, but they also wanted people who weren't necessarily good at action sequences to be able to play and enjoy the game. Finding Chao eggs and raising them also imperceptibly made these players better reinvent the game's action sequences and help them progress. Takashi Iizuka stated, "We really wanted to introduce Sonic to people who weren't good at action games and expand the reach of the game. That's why we included the Chow in the design. We really just wanted to expand the world of Sonic and to expand the game to people who had never had the chance to play a Sonic game before." The Dreamcast version of Sonic Adventure states that Chow Gardens were created in protected environments. However, it's possible to drown in the pools in both the Egg Carrier and Mystic Ruins Chow Gardens. You can also drown in the Dark and Hero Chow Gardens in Sonic Adventure 2 on the Dreamcast. This can only be done with Tails though, as he's short and most of his head is submerged. The water was made shallower in Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, making the areas safe again. Sega also changed the Chow Gardens in Sonic Adventure DX for the GameCube. What's confusing about the change, however, is that players can still drown in them even though the problem had been solved in Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, which released the previous year. Did you know? Sonic Adventure 2 had a hidden backstory tucked away in a Japanese strategy guide. This backstory details the events that led to the creation of Shadow the Hedgehog. Maria Robotnik, Dr. Eggman's cousin, suffered from a fictional incurable disease called NIDS, or Neuroimmunodeficiency Syndrome. The name of this disease explicitly references the real-life disease known as AIDS, Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. Maria's contraction of NIDS led her grandfather, Professor Gerald Robotnik, to begin research on immortality. His research eventually led to the creation of the so-called ultimate life form, Shadow the Hedgehog. This backstory was never referenced in-game, perhaps due to the controversial nature of the subject matter. Despite this, the story was incorporated into the Archie comics storyline with both Maria Robotnik and Bonz Rabot contracting NIDS. One of the main events in Sonic Adventure 2 sees Dr. Eggman destroy a large portion of the moon to demonstrate the Eclipse Cannon's power. In later Sonic games, however, the moon appears to be completely intact. At the 2013 Sonic Boom event, the game's director Takashi Iizuka was asked about this inconsistency. Iizuka said the moon had simply rotated, so subsequent games show the unbroken side of it. In real life though, this would be impossible, as the moon always faces the Earth from the same side. In a process called synchronous rotation, the moon spins on its axis at the same rate that it orbits the Earth, so the moon appears to be almost completely still. Iizuka was most likely just put on the spot by this question and gave a simple answer. Sonic Adventure 2's cutscenes are infamous for their numerous audio issues. The lip syncing doesn't match the voices, and the characters will often talk over each other.
You're not even good enough to be my...
I'll make you eat those words!
This is because the cutscenes are animated to fit the Japanese dub, and when the game was localized, the Japanese speech was simply swapped out for the English dub. Because many of the lines were longer in English, characters are often cut off before they finish talking.
スペースコロニーだかなんだか知らないが、あのでかい大砲ごと奴らを吹っ飛ばしてやる。I don't know what this space colony is all about, but I'll find and destroy that cannon, and then kick their imperial butt. All right.
But while the cutscenes were animated for the Japanese dub, Sonic Adventure 2 was in fact developed in America. After the Japanese version of Sonic Adventure was completed, Sonic Team split into two halves. One half remained in Japan to work on games such as Phantasy Star Online, and the other half relocated to San Francisco to begin localizing Sonic Adventure for the West. The new division was known as Sonic Team USA. Once Sonic Adventure was localized, work began on the sequel. Inspired by their new surroundings, the team wanted Sonic Adventure 2 to have more of an American flavor. During an interview with IGN, Takashi Iizuka explained the reason behind this new direction. Since Sonic Team USA is residing around San Francisco and the Bay Area, we see a lot of beautiful images here in San Francisco every day, and we wanted to apply those elements in the game. Of course, the world of Sonic Adventure 2 is a fictional world, so our intention is not to create a simulation of San Francisco, but we're really inspired by what we see in the city. It's easy to spot many of these inspirations when playing the game. City Escape is based on the city of San Francisco itself, and the bridge seen in Radical Highway is based off the famous Golden Gate Bridge. Additionally, the game's two driving levels, Route 101 and Route 280, are named after real highways in California. While they were working on the game, members of the development team would occasionally receive parking tickets costing around $30 each. The tickets were passed out by parking attendants who drove small cars with only 3 wheels. As a form of revenge, the team included these vehicles in Tails' mission street level and allowed the player to destroy them. This was all done in good fun, though the team did acknowledge that the traffic wardens were just doing their jobs. One of Sonic's new abilities introduced in Sonic Adventure 2 is grinding on rails. The final version of the game includes many advertisements for soap shoes as part of a deal. The shoes have concave soles that allow the wearer to grind along rails, and Sonic wears these shoes in the game. The sponsorship deal appears to have been secured very late in development, as early screenshots of the game show Sonic in his more traditional footwear. Sonic's original shoes can also be seen during certain frames of his bouncing animation in the final game. Furthermore, in the Dreamcast version of the game, Sonic can be seen wearing his original shoes for part of the intro cinematic. This error was corrected in future ports of the game. According to Iizuka, Shadow the Hedgehog was originally intended to have remained dead following the events of Sonic Adventure 2. In a Q&A at Summer of Sonic 2011, he stated, "As you know in the story, Shadow was only meant to appear in that single title, but because of the reaction of the fans, we decided to bring him back in Sonic Heroes, and eventually you saw him in his own title." It's also possible that Amy Rose was intended to be a playable character outside of multiplayer. In the Dreamcast version's game data, text can be found in the game's code that tells the player how much the Chow likes Amy, suggesting that she may have originally been playable. It also seems that Super Sonic and Super Shadow were intended to be playable in multiplayer. Text can be found, some of which reads, "Congratulations, you've cleared Green Hill with rank A. Strongest characters are now available to use in Sonic and Shadow 2-player versus mode." It seems that the player would need to clear Green Hill with an A rank in order to unlock the characters. A difficult task, as unlocking Green Hill requires the player to collect all 180 emblems. Speaking of multiplayer, the game was originally going to have more online capabilities. Unused files in the game's code explicitly refer to a world ranking system, with text having been finalized for these menus. Several events in Sonic Adventure 2 also seem to be lifted straight from the 1999 PlayStation game Pepsi Man. One level has Pepsi Man skating downhill through San Francisco, and a later level has him running from an 18-wheeler. Both scenarios were used in Sonic Adventure 2's City Escape level over 2 years after Pepsi Man's release.
Did you know? Sonic Heroes holds the Guinness World Record for the most playable characters in a platform game, with 12 characters total. This is thanks to the game's team-based gameplay, which has 3 characters being controlled at once. The focus on team-based play was partly a response to the Sonic Adventure titles and their various gameplay styles. The game's director Takashi Iizuka felt that having Adventure 1 and 2's gameplay change drastically between characters limited their audience to hardcore gamers. The title Sonic Heroes was chosen to distance Heroes from the Sonic Adventure games. If Heroes was titled Sonic Adventure 3 instead, gamers who didn't play the first 2 adventures might have been discouraged from buying it. Heroes was also streamlined to the point of excluding fan-favorite features such as the Chow Garden. These side quests were removed so that nothing distracted from the main game and hurt its pacing. The bosses in Heroes were specifically designed to flee from players. This was done to keep the gameplay between the main stages and the boss battles consistent. In past Sonic games, the player would run at high speeds until encountering a boss, where the game would come to a halt. Accommodating new players was a large concern for the team, as Heroes was the series' first true multi-platform game. Sonic Team licensed the Renderware engine to make porting Heroes to the GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox easier. The team also hoped that using the same engine would make the various ports comparable. Despite this, the PS2 version of Heroes was notably lower in quality than its counterparts. The PS2's weaker performance meant that Heroes suffered from a worse frame rate, as well as aliasing. Iizuka believed they could have made the game run better if it was built from the ground up to run on the PS2. The designers' focus on accessibility affected the game's visuals and story as well. Critics noted that level themes in Heroes were more creative than either of the adventure games. In an interview with Electronic Gaming Monthly, Iizuka explained that previous 3D Sonic games were constrained by story requirements, as levels had to fit a coherent narrative. Heroes lacked an involved story, so its levels were free of requirements and could be more imaginative. Iizuka apparently wanted to make a 3D pinball stage like Casino Park as early as Sonic Adventure, but couldn't find a way to make it fit the game's world. Sonic Heroes saw the return of the Chaotix crew, a team that had made their only appearance in the Sega 32X game Knuckles Chaotix. It too featured team-based gameplay, with 2 characters being tethered to one another at all times. As the characters perfectly fitted the Sonic Heroes' team-based gameplay, Sonic Team decided to reuse them. However, the current incarnation of the team is very different from their debut. Originally, the group wasn't a detective agency, SBO wasn't a ninja, and Charmy the Bee was described as being surprisingly sophisticated. This change can be attributed to Sonic Team never having anything to do with the Chaotix's original portrayals, as Knuckles Chaotix was developed by a different internal team at Sega. In Iizuka's mind, Sonic Team weren't just reviving past characters, but essentially making new characters using old designs. Interestingly, Charmy's revised personality resembles his portrayal in the UK tie-in comic, Sonic the Comic, which was made almost 9 years earlier. The comics version of Charmy had a tendency to annoy his teammates with bizarre mannerisms and a hyperactive personality. This is similar to his appearance in Heroes, where he is described as a scatterbrained funny kid. Cream the Rabbit had a complicated entrance to this series. Cream was planned to debut in Heroes, but made her playable premiere in Sonic Advance 2, over a year before the release of Heroes. She was added in order to make Sonic Advance 2 more distinct from the first Sonic Advance game. This also let Sega introduce Cream before she appeared in the first episode of the anime Sonic X. Tails' voice actor, William Corkery, was only 10 years old when Heroes was released, making him the youngest actor ever to play a character in the Sonic series. His sister Emily also lent her voice to the game at only 14 years old, playing Charmy B. Their father, Bill Corkery, was also the voice of Espio the Chameleon. While Team Chaotix's Team Blast may sound unintelligible, each player is actually singing their own distinct lines. The vocals either cut each other off or get drowned out by sound effects. Their Team Blast's presentation may also be a nod from an unused idea from Sonic 1, where Sonic and Vector played in a band for the game's sound test. An early version of Sonic Heroes' Attract Mode video can be found in Sonic Mega Collection Plus. The cinematic is a work in progress, with the visuals switching between finished and incomplete animation. It also features an unfinished version of the game's titular song. This version has no lyrics written, with singer Johnny Joeli instead scatting the tune. Unused files also hint at several changes during Heroes' production. In the retail version of Heroes, Team Rose and Team Chaotix only play through small segments of full levels. But it seems this wasn't always the case. Dialogue also exists for Mystic Mansion that alludes to a room full of doors and switches. However, no such room exists in Heroes. In the final game, using Team Blast during battles will revive fallen teammates, but unused audio suggests that at some point, the Team Blast could only be used if all 3 characters were still active. Unused lines also hint that the Metal Madness fight was planned to be very different. The boss would have wielded additional powers, such as the ability to turn invisible. There's also a mistranslated line in Sonic Team's version of Final Fortress. After pressing the self-destruct button in the first area of the game, Tails will ask, "Wonder why it's self-destructed?" The line doesn't make much sense, as Tails advises the player to hit the self-destruct switch beforehand. In the Japanese script, Tails instead asks why Dr. Eggman would make the self-destruct switch so easily accessible, a joke at the expense of the level design. In Super Hard Mode, Knuckles asks Tails if he can handle the stormy weather, and Tails admits that he's a little afraid of it. This is potentially a reference to the 1993 Sonic the Hedgehog OVA, in which Tails was astrophobic. One of the most unusual details of the game lies within its instruction manual. According to the booklet, Dr. Robotnik is both a romanticist and a feminist. Another secret can be found while playing as Team Dark. If the player is currently controlling a character other than Rouge, and looks at her in first-person view, she will turn to them and wink.
Did you know? While Shadow the Hedgehog was in development, Sega considered other spin-off titles based on Tails, Knuckles, and Dr. Eggman. The first rumors of a Sonic the Hedgehog spin-off arose in early 2005. Sega hosted an online poll asking which Sonic characters fans would like to see star in their own game. The 4 choices were Tails, Knuckles, Shadow, or Dr. Eggman. The poll also asked voters to pick their preferred subtitles for each of these characters' hypothetical games. Shadow's choices included Renegade Hedgehog, Rebel with a Cause, Chaos Unleashed, and Sonic's Nemesis. While the poll appeared before Shadow the Hedgehog was announced, it's unlikely that it had much of an impact on the game's direction. This is due to how close the poll was conducted before the game's reveal. Fans did impact the game in a significant way, however. A promotional event was held in Japan where Shadow performed as a wrestling announcer and awarded the winning wrestler a pack of 10 Sega games. Sonic creator Yuji Naka also attended the event and commented on some of the game's influences. Naka said, "We received letters from kids, and many of them had asked for Sonic to have a gun. We felt that it wasn't appropriate for Sonic to have a gun, but maybe it'd be okay with Shadow, and that's how we started on the game." Naka was also optimistic about Shadow's franchise potential. In an interview with GameSpy, he stated, "We've had ideas of doing a spin-off series, so perhaps that's what Shadow will lead to." Shadow the Hedgehog was heavily influenced by the proliferation of first- and third-person shooters in the Western market. While the Japanese Sonic team was developing a more traditional Sonic title, Sega Studios USA was tasked with developing a game that would have a greater directional impact on the series. Shadow was chosen as the star of this new venture due to his popularity, being second only to Sonic. Another factor taken into consideration was Shadow's moral ambiguity. Shadow is neither definitively good nor evil, so by casting him as the main character, the team hoped players would form their own impression of him. The game's director, Takashi Iizuka, felt that the change in protagonist afforded the team an opportunity to introduce new elements that would feel out of place for Sonic. One such element was the inclusion of curse words such as damn. Contrary to popular belief, Shadow the Hedgehog is not the first Sonic game to include a curse word. That honor goes to Sonic Adventure 2, in which Knuckles' theme, Unknown From Me, contains the word damn. Although Shadow the Hedgehog is infamous for its swearing and violence, it was originally meant to be more graphic. The goal was to earn a teen rating from the ESRB, but coincidentally, the E10 Plus rating was introduced during the game's development. The team decided to aim for this new rating instead, resulting in some of the game's content being toned down. These revisions included changing the Black Arm's blood from red to green, editing scenes of gun soldiers' deaths out of the opening, cutting away from Maria's death before her limp body is shown, and censoring dialogue. There are even files in Shadow the Hedgehog's data that suggest Sonic was planned to be in the game's multiplayer mode. It appears that he was cut early in development, as all that exists are Junichi Kanemaru's voice lines for the Japanese dub. Sonic was most likely removed so that Sega's mascot wasn't seen handling firearms. Although the game was toned down in many ways, it still included a few troubling scenes when it released. One example has Shadow attempting to assassinate the president, and another scene has him detonate a bomb that destroys Central City. The timing of the game's release was poor, as the attempted assassination of President George W. Bush and the London 7/7 bombings happened earlier in the same year. Shadow the Hedgehog was the first game in the Sonic series to feature the voice cast from the television series Sonic X. Fans speculated that the cast was replaced due to the death of Dr. Eggman's original voice actor, Dean Bristow, in January 2005. This turned out to be incorrect. The current voice of Dr. Eggman, Mike Pollock, debunked this theory in an interview with Sonic Scene, confirming that the decision to replace the cast was made prior to Bristow's death. The Shadow who stars in Shadow the Hedgehog is the same character that appeared in Sonic Adventure 2. It's likely that many players missed this information, which is the resolution to a cliffhanger introduced in Sonic Heroes. The end of Team Dark's story in Sonic Heroes heavily implies that the Shadow in that game is a robot replica of the original created by Dr. Eggman. Shadow the Hedgehog further adds to the confusion, with many of the game's branching storylines presenting a completely different history for the character. However, if the fight against the game's final boss lasts for 8 minutes, Dr. Eggman will contact Shadow and confirm that he is, indeed, the original that appeared back in Sonic Adventure 2. According to him, Eggman rescued Shadow from his fall using a robot and went on to use him as the basis for his Shadow androids. Shadow the Hedgehog innovated the Sonic franchise by allowing players to drive vehicles and wield firearms. These features were met with uncertainty, with many fans considering them to be out of place in a Sonic game. Despite the controversy, Iizuka defended their inclusion, saying, "Shadow the Hedgehog is a unique, original character, separate from Sonic the Hedgehog. The reason I created Shadow the Hedgehog as a main character for this game is so I can give Shadow different abilities that Sonic wasn't able to do, and that includes using weapons or using vehicles and whatnot." To mirror the game's more mature tone, the team took inspiration from movies aimed at an older audience, including Underworld, Constantine, and Terminator. As well as inspirations, the game has many nods and references to pop culture. Upon completing the dark mission of the level The Ark, the cutscene that plays shows the Eclipse cannon destroying the White House in a reference to the 1996 movie Independence Day. Two of the game's bosses, Blue Falcon and Black Bull, share their names with vehicles from Nintendo's F-Zero series. They belong to protagonist Captain Falcon and antagonist Black Shadow, respectively. After completing the hero mission of Westopolis, Sonic exclaims, "Welcome to the next level." This was a slogan used in Sega advertisements throughout the 90s. Gun soldiers will sometimes mention the former head of Sonic Team, saying, "Mr. Yuji Naka is all right." The egg vacuum weapon is a reference to another Sega franchise, Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg. The game's antagonist, Black Doom, also seems to be a reference to another Sonic Team property. He bears an uncanny resemblance to Wise Man the Wicked, the antagonist of Nights into Dreams. Both characters take the form of a seemingly legless cloak with similar shoulder pads, neckwear, pendants, and 9 prominent horns on their heads. Both characters also have detachable eyes and were the creators of their respective games' protagonists.
Did you know? 2006's Sonic the Hedgehog was made to celebrate the Sonic franchise's 15th anniversary. According to series creator Yuji Naka, the game's simplistic title was chosen to mark this milestone, but also to signify the series going back to its roots. Despite Sonic Team's lofty ambitions, Sonic 06 released with numerous bugs and technical issues and is widely considered one of the worst games of all time. In its original form, Sonic 06 was not meant to be a Sonic title at all. Instead, it was supposed to be a brand new title set in a realistic world, making use of a dynamic physics engine. But when the time came to create a new next-gen Sonic the Hedgehog title, the team combined this idea with the Sonic world. They felt the realistic look and physics would enable them to create vast environments for the player to explore. To complement these huge levels, the team wanted to include multiple playable characters, allowing players to tackle the same levels in different ways. The character Silver the Hedgehog was created out of the team's desire to capitalize on the dynamic physics engine. As a character with psychic powers, Silver would be able to grab and throw objects around the environment with ease. In his initial design, Silver was an orange mink named Venice. This name came from the real-life city of Venice, which inspired the game's setting, Soleanna. In fact, Silver went through over 50 iterations before the team settled on his final look. To integrate him more with the existing cast, they eventually made him a hedgehog. To make full use of the increased power of the next-gen consoles, they applied a more complex texture to the character that was silver in color. Silver was also inspired by the character Trunks from Dragon Ball Z. The influence is clear. Both characters travel back in time from their respective futures to prevent an apocalyptic disaster. The game's script even ends Silver's character description with, essentially, think Trunks from Dragon Ball Z. Silver isn't the only character to be influenced by outside sources. The characters Iblis and Mephiles take their names from world mythologies based on the devil. Mephiles is a contraction of Mephistopheles, a demon who appears in the legend of Faust. Mephistopheles appears before the titular Dr. Faust, offering him knowledge, power, and pleasure in exchange for his soul. Iblis, on the other hand, is the Islamic interpretation of the devil. Blaze the cat's character was heavily revised for her appearance in Sonic 06. In 2005's Sonic Rush, she was originally a princess from an alternate dimension. In Sonic 06, she's Silver's companion, traveling back in time with him to prevent the apocalypse. When asked about this inconsistency, series producer Takashi Iizuka said, "Basically what happened is that everyone had like amnesia." According to her bio in the game's script, Blaze is deeply embarrassed by her bust size and gets angry if anyone mentions it. Sonic 06's development was troubled. The team was pressured by heavy time constraints, speculated to have been caused by a deal between Sega and Microsoft to launch Sonic 06 on the Xbox 360 before Christmas. This deal involved viral advertisements through Microsoft's Windows Live Messenger service, which advertised both Sonic 06 and Sonic Rivals for the PSP. Although there are obvious visual examples of the game's lack of polish, the game's audio also suffered. At one point in Shadow's story, the player will receive a message from Gun HQ. The message's audio contains 2 takes from the voice actor, with the first take being an obvious failed attempt at speaking the line.
Agent Shadow, E123 Omega has engaged Mephiles. Head to the Wave Ocean, head to Wave Ocean. Agent Shadow, E123 Omega...
Developers simply forgot to remove the failed take. The time constraints were exacerbated due to the team working with unfamiliar hardware. Sega had intended to release Sonic 06 on PC, and the 3 new 7th generation consoles, the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, and the Wii. Sonic Team expected the Wii to be comparable to the 360 and the PS3 in terms of power and functionality of its controller. However, when they were given the development kits for the Wii, they realized it would be impossible to port Sonic 06 to the system. As Sega demanded there be a Sonic title on the Wii near launch, the Sonic 06 team was split into 2 halves. One half continued their work, and the other half was told to develop a Wii game from scratch. This resulted in Sonic 06's director Yojiro Ogawa leaving development to work on what would become Sonic and the Secret Rings. The team was then further fragmented when Yuji Naka left Sega in March 2006 to start his own studio. The game's PC version never came to fruition, presumably due to time constraints. Sonic 06's rushed production resulted in a lot of cut content. The game's manual describes a shield power-up identical to those found in the older Sonic titles that never actually appears in the game. Its model can be accessed through hacking, but the shield is functionless when equipped to a character. In the original teaser, Sonic was shown turning into Super Sonic at will. A remnant of this can be found by hacking the game to find an item called the Rainbow Gem. When equipped and used, Sonic will perform a brief transforming animation before dropping to the ground as normal. It seems this gem was going to be the catalyst for Sonic's transformation into Super Sonic, but as Super Sonic was never programmed into the game, only the animation remains. The game was originally supposed to have a day and night cycle, which was later used in Sonic Unleashed, as well as multiple endings. An achievement in the Xbox 360 version called Knights of Kronos is awarded to the player for clearing the last story with an S rank. The achievement's description reads, "Unlock the complete ending to the last hidden story," implying that the game should have had extra scenes when the player fulfilled these conditions. An infamous glitch allows Silver to continuously trap the player against a wall and attack them. This causes the player to lose and recollect the same ring over and over again, preventing them from breaking free or dying. As well as the game's frustrating glitches, the romance between Sonic the Hedgehog and Princess Elise has been criticized. Some have even accused Sega of advocating bestiality. GameSpy asked Elise's voice actor Lacey Chabert about the situation. Chabert said, "Ha! No, you're just being silly. It's not an appropriate relationship. Let's just say Sonic and Princess Elise have an attraction for each other." As Sonic 06 served as a series reboot, it's possible that Sonic's relationship with Elise was a nod to an unused concept in the original Sonic the Hedgehog, where Sonic was planned to have a human girlfriend named Madonna.
Did you know? Much of Sonic Mania's development staff have a history in creating Sonic fan games and other projects. Christian Whitehead, also known as the Taxman, was known for creating the fan game Retro Sonic. Retro Sonic ran on the Retro engine, which was custom built by Whitehead and allowed him to replicate the physics of the classic Sonic games. This engine would become integral to Whitehead's official involvement with Sega. In 2009, Whitehead developed a proof of concept for the iOS port of Sonic CD. Unlike Sega's iOS ports, which ran on an emulator, Whitehead's proof of concept was instead rebuilt from the ground up and used his Retro Engine software development kit. This allowed for new features to be added, as well as a consistent frame rate and widescreen support. However, it was not the engine itself that replicated Sonic's physics. Whitehead had to manually reconstruct them through rigorous frame-by-frame analysis of the original title. Whitehead emailed Sega to pitch the game to them, but did not receive a reply. 2 weeks later, Sega asked the community on their blog which games they would like to see ported to iOS. In response, Whitehead publicly revealed his Sonic CD prototype, wanting to send them a clear message about what they should be working on. He also prompted fans to let Sega know if they were interested in seeing this prototype become a reality. The push was successful, with Sega responding to the video on Twitter. Whitehead's version of Sonic CD was even published by Sega in 2011. Following his port success, Sega contacted Whitehead again, this time to handle ports of Sonic 1 and Sonic 2. Working with him was Simon Tomley, aka Stealth. Tomley also had a storied history with Sonic Fanworks. He was involved in the community during its formative years, heading the popular Sonic Mega Mix project, and was responsible for porting fan creations to the Wii and Sega CD. He also created an unofficial port of Sonic 1 for the Game Boy Advance, a response to the poor quality of the Game Boy Advance's Sonic Genesis. While Whitehead reproduced the games through observation and recreation, Tomley was more familiar with the assembly code of the original games. The pair's collaboration was fruitful, and their ports of Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 boasted many advantages and were well received by the community. Whitehead and Tomley, under his company name Headcanon, would go on to form a core part of Sonic Mania's development team. Joining them was Pagoda West Games, a company born of yet another Sonic fan project, this time the unofficial remake Sonic the Hedgehog 2 HD. Pagoda West's Tom Fry and Jared Castle met on the project, and formed a close friendship based on their similar outlooks on game design. Their experience on Sonic 2 HD was invaluable, teaching them the importance of keeping to deadlines and choosing the right team for the job. Joining them was musician T. Lopes, known for his unofficial Sonic remixes. Sonic Mania was pitched to Sega by these three companies. The project was first presented to Sonic team head Takashi Iizuka in 2016. Only Studio Police Zone was made at the time, and the game went under the title Sonic Discovery. After the presentation concluded, Iizuka simply told told the team, "I have many questions," before they had to break for lunch. When they came back, Iizuka wrote a series of titles on a whiteboard going from Sonic 1 through Sonic and Knuckles. He then added one more title, Sonic Mania. As the project advanced, more staff had to be brought on, with many of these new members also boasting a history in the Sonic fan community. Programmer Hunter Bridges and designer Brad Flick previously worked on the fan game Sonic Nexus. Artist Paul Veer, known for his work on Nuclear Throne, was commissioned to provide Cook and Becker's official Sonic print. Audio engineer Falk O. Young is known for his contributions to several Sonic soundtracks, and artist Kieran Gates has helped organize the UK fan convention Summer of Sonic. The game's pre-order trailer and introduction were animated by Tyson Hess, known for his work on Archie's Sonic the Hedgehog comics and the parody Sonic's Big Fat Adventure. One story considered for the game saw Eggman fall into a deep depression following Sonic and Knuckles. To fill the gap, a group of Egg Robos would become independent, calling themselves the Hard-Boiled Heavies. While the Eggman angle was dropped, the Hard-Boiled Heavies remained as major antagonists in the game. The Mania team were shown production material from the Genesis titles, including scrapped levels and concepts. Mirage Saloon was based on 2 levels that didn't make the final cut, Dust Hill from Sonic 2 and Desert Dazzle from the 2011 re-release of Sonic CD. Sonic Mania was influenced by the aesthetics of the Saturn-era Sonic titles. This choice allowed the limited team to produce a high-quality title with a lot of content, rather than opt for HD graphics and have potential complications arise. The 3D models in the special stages pay homage to the character's Saturn model seen in games like Sonic R, although they are in fact brand new. To drive home the 90s aesthetic, Sega produced an advertisement for the game in the style of an old Sonic 2 commercial. Both spoof infomercials by comedically boasting about the game's practical applications, such as handling tough stains and acting as a hairpiece. Mania's commercial even featured Kazuyuki Hoshino, a Sonic Team artist responsible for the character design on Sonic CD. As you might expect, Sonic Mania contains a huge number of nods and references to the rest of the Sonic series, as well as other Sega properties. Signs can be found in Studiopolis that read Cope. This is a reference to similar signs found in Spring Yard Zone in Sonic 1. Clipboards in Studiopolis have the following initials on them: CW, HC, and PWG. These stand for Christian Whitehead, Headcanon, and Pagoda West Games, respectively. The SegaSonic Popcorn Shop is named after a product released exclusively in Japan, a combination arcade game and popcorn vending machine. The televisions in Studiopolis show a symbol that highly resembles the logo of the Sega Game Gear. Signs in Studiopolis reading Pinkbot are a nod to signs in Streets of Rage that read Pinebot. The Club Spin Ages signs seem to reference both Club Sega in Japan and an old logo from UK Mega Drive commercials, To Be This Good Takes Ages, with ages being Sega backwards. Wanted posters of Knack the Weasel, Bark the Polar Bear, and Bean the Dynamite appear in the Mirage Saloon Zone. While this is a nod to the character's long absence from the series, it's also a nod to Sonic Generations, where they also appeared on wanted posters in City Escape. The Studiopolis Zone shares its name with Studiopolis Inc., the production studio that records the English voiceovers for the Sonic series. Funnily enough, this was actually a complete coincidence. The team were unaware of the studio when they were naming the level. When they found out, they drafted some different titles for the zone, thinking that they would be asked to change it. Suggested titles included Opening Night and Fame Plaza. However, Studiopolis gave the go-ahead to use the name, and so it was kept, with Whitehead thinking it was now a cool reference.
Did you know? Sonic Generations was prematurely revealed to the public after a document was leaked by Sega of America in August 2009. The document appeared on Sega of America's official press site and detailed a meeting between Sega and Sony Computer Entertainment America. The document described plans for various upcoming games and features, including a title simply called Sonic Anniversary. The initial concepts for Sonic Anniversary included a collector's edition that would gather the best of Sonic for around $99. More information was leaked leaked during a convention in Madrid called Game Fest in 2010. A staff member of the website SonicParadise.net spoke with a Sega representative who revealed that Sonic Anniversary was in development for the PS3, PSP, DS, and Wii, with an Xbox 360 release being negotiated. The representative also revealed that the game would compile some of the most popular levels from the series and reimagine them for a modern playstyle. The development of Sonic Generations was somewhat influenced by the state of the Sonic fanbase. In an interview with Destructoid, Sonic series developer Takashi Iizuka commented on the fractured fanbase. He mentioned that some fans preferred the 2D games on the Genesis, while other fans preferred the more recent 3D installments. Because of this, when the time came to celebrate the series' 20th anniversary, the team decided to revive classic Sonic and have him star alongside modern Sonic. This way, the team could cater to both sides of the fanbase. The fans also had another, more direct influence on the development of the game. To decide which stages would be included, the fans were asked to disclose their favorite levels on Facebook in 2009. The poll contained a comprehensive list of levels from the major Sonic titles available at the time. Interestingly, the poll did allow fans to choose levels from Sonic and the Secret Rings and Sonic and the Black Knight, suggesting that these levels were once to have been represented in Generations as well. In an interview with the Sonic Stadium, Iizuka revealed that the 3DS port of Generations was intended to be a celebration of Sonic's portable history. Despite this, the game only contained one handheld exclusive level in the form of Water Palace from Sonic Rush. A downloadable demo for Sonic Generations was released on June 23, 2011, which was the 20th anniversary of Sonic 1's publication. Soon after the demo's release, its data was mined to reveal many of its assets. These assets included head icons for the supporting cast, sparking speculation that other characters may be playable. In an interview with Sega Bits, Sonic brand manager Aaron Weber expressed disappointment with these leaks. He felt that they created false expectations, calling them a misrepresentation. The demo also revealed that classic Sonic's physics were not a one-to-one recreation of those found in the Genesis games. The reason given for this was that the physics had to be estimated using the modern Sonic engine, making a perfect recreation nearly impossible. Many unused textures from the game are from 2008's Sonic Unleashed, suggesting that Generations was built on top of the Unleashed framework. Ryan Drummond, Sonic's English voice actor between 1999 and 2004, was originally going to reprise his role for Sonic Generations. In 2010, Sega chose to replace most of the series' voice cast. This included Jason Griffith, who was the voice of Sonic in video games since 2005. In an interview with The Gaming Liberty, Drummond revealed that Sega contacted him during the development of Generations, asking him to re-audition for the role of Sonic. Drummond initially appeared to be a shoo-in for the role, but eventually declined due to his distaste for the contract. In his own words, "When the actual offer came to my agent, it was a complete joke. They asked me to leave my union, which is how I make a living, do all kind of work for no compensation, etc. It was a real slap in the face. I really don't see it ever happening. Sega is a huge corporation with zillions of dollars, and they don't see any need to change the way they do things." Since Drummond declined the offer, Roger Craig Smith was chosen for the role instead. An interesting offshoot of this is that a third playable Sonic may have been intended for Sonic Generations. According to Unseen64, this third Sonic was going to have represented the Dreamcast era of Sonic Adventure, Sonic Adventure 2, and Sonic Heroes. This seems fitting, as those were the three games in which Drummond voiced the character. In an interview with Kotaku, Aaron Weber revealed that Jaleel White was once slated to voice classic Sonic in the game, as White originally voiced the Hedgehog in various cartoons throughout the 90s. For unknown reasons, the plan fell through, and so classic Sonic was left mute. According to Jaleel, Sega didn't approach him to voice Sonic, so this plan likely didn't get very far. Sonic Generations was written by the writing team of Ken Pontac and Warren Graff, best known for their writing on the ultra-violent animation Happy Tree Friends. Pontac became involved with Sega when they published Happy Tree Friends False Alarm for Xbox Live Arcade in 2008. This led to the pair working on Mad World and eventually Sonic the Hedgehog. Despite this, Pontac claims that he's not much of a Sonic fan. He hadn't played many of the games and instead had to look up cutscenes online to get an idea of the characters. He also addressed the criticisms he received from fans, simply thanking the fans for being so enthusiastic about the characters. Despite the writers not being fans, however, Generations Generations is still jam-packed with references to the rest of the Sonic series. Tails becomes nervous when he sees the purple liquid that covers Chemical Plant Zone. This is perhaps a reference to an infamous sequence in Sonic 2 where the player must climb a vertical shaft in order to avoid drowning in the liquid. Sonic 2, of course, was Tails' debut game. Sonic quips that the color being sucked out of the land is no stranger than rescuing genies in magic books or saving aliens in an interstellar amusement park, referring to the stories of Sonic and the Secret Rings and Sonic Colors, respectively. In the level select, Knuckles can be found in front of Sky Sanctuary with bunches of grapes growing behind him. This is a reference to the Sonic 3 instruction manual, which mentions that his favorite food is grapes. When performing stunts as Sonic, pressing L and R to finish the stunts will cause Sonic to strike an identical pose to the one seen on Sonic Adventure's cover art. And in City Escape, there are posters in the background that make references to 5 seemingly forgotten Sonic characters. There are wanted posters featuring Knack the Weasel, Bean the Dynamite, and Bark the Polar Bear from Sonic the Fighters, as well as missing person posters featuring Ray the Flying Squirrel and Mighty the Armadillo from the arcade game SegaSonic the Hedgehog. At both the UK convention Summer of Sonic 2011 and the US convention Sonic Boom 2011, the respective crowds were asked to cheer "Happy Birthday, Sonic." Both of those cheers were recorded and can be heard at the end of the game's credits.
Did you know? Sonic Advance was one of the first projects Sega considered after the discontinuation of the Dreamcast. In January 2001, Sega of Japan issued a press release stating that they were restructuring the company. They specified that they were in negotiations with Sony and Nintendo, who until very recently were Sega's fiercest competitors. The negotiations were over the creation of software for the PlayStation 2 and Game Boy Advance. And at the end of the month, Sega revealed one of the titles they discussed would be Sonic the Hedgehog Advance. Although Sonic Advance would be the first Sonic game on a Nintendo console, it was not Sonic's first game on a third-party system. Sonic Jam had been ported to the Tiger Gamecom in 1997, and Sonic Pocket Adventure was released for the Neo Geo Pocket Color in 1999. Sonic Pocket Adventure was developed as a joint effort between Sonic Team and SNK. The game was staffed by the likes of Takeshi Nishiyama and Hiroshi Matsumoto, who were the director and designer for the original Street Fighter, respectively. Nishiyama left SNK soon after to create DIMPS, the company that would produce the Sonic Advance series. He was joined at DIMPS by Matsumoto, who'd go on to become the producer on Sonic Advance 1 and 2. Series creator Yuji Naka found his return to creating 2D games refreshing, especially after developing 3D games for so long. He often wondered what it'd be like to make a Sonic game for Nintendo hardware, and felt that a Sonic game made for a Nintendo console would be very different in tone and style to the one made for a Sega console. Naka understood the importance of a company's identity, and felt that a Sonic game made for a Nintendo console would be very different in tone and style to one made for a Sega console. Sega had always presented themselves as being more high-tech than Nintendo, and as such had an easier time marketing towards an older audience. Nintendo, on the other hand, always had an easier time appealing to children thanks to their toy box approach to game development. Sega and Nintendo also had vastly different approaches to quality control. While Sonic Team had only spent a couple weeks tweaking and balancing their titles before release, Nintendo were a lot more meticulous. Naka was also interested in the connectivity between the GameCube and the GBA, and was eager to include the feature in Sonic Advance. The Chow Garden presented the perfect opportunity to use the technology. In the Dreamcast version of Sonic Adventure 2, players could download Chow into the Dreamcast's visual memory unit to interact with it on the move. But in the GameCube remake, the player could instead download their Chow into Sonic Advance's tiny Chow Garden. The GBA's greater processing power allowed for more advanced Chow interaction on the go. Naka's enthusiasm for the system actually spurred on Nintendo's teams to make better use of it. The Chow Garden is also linked to a notable glitch that contributed to a second version of the game being released. If the player deletes their save file in the game, they'll be prevented from transferring new rings they collect to the Chow Garden. This is because deleting the main save file doesn't remove the ring count data from the Chow Garden, and if the ring count in the main game and the garden aren't synced, the rings won't transfer. This can only be fixed by collecting the exact same amount of rings as the player had before, or by using hacking devices like GameShark. The glitch was fixed in the Japan-exclusive version 1.1 release, and is said to be fixed in the English Combo Pack releases. Sonic Advance was also released as Sonic N for the Nokia N-Gage handheld in 2003. This version of the game was largely criticized for its lack of a Chow Garden, slower speed, and inferior audio and visual quality. The N-Gage's screen was taller than it was wide, making the game near impossible to play in its portrait mode, as players couldn't see approaching enemies or objects. To compensate for this, Sega added an option to play with a 4:3 landscape aspect ratio. However, this scaled the sprites down without any filtering, causing loss of detail and a grainy finish. This version of the game also never released in Japan. Sonic Advance's opening stage, Neo Green Hill Zone, is possibly a reference to a scrapped level name from Sonic the Hedgehog 2 on Sega Genesis. The Aquatic Ruin Zone was called Neo Green Hill Zone in an earlier version of the game. However, this isn't conclusive. Many zones in Sonic Advance share similarities with zones from Sonic Pocket Adventure, and Neo Green Hill Zone may be inspired by the first level, Neo South Island Zone. South Island is the setting for the original Sonic the Hedgehog, meaning that Green Hill is located there. Casino Paradise Zone also contains a few secrets. The castle in the zone's background bears a strong resemblance to the Magic Kingdom at Disney World, and is even lit the same way the Magic Kingdom is at night. As well as being a clear nod to Sonic 2's Casino Night Zone, a platform similar to the Barrel of Doom from Sonic 3's Carnival Night Zone also appears in Act 2. A welcome sign at the start of the level may also be a reference to the Sonic the Hedgehog prototype, where there was a welcome sign in Green Hill Zone. Sonic Advance 2 was conceived immediately after the completion of the first game on GBA, and work began in February of 2002. The speed of the game was increased so much from Sonic Advance that the levels had to be made around 6 times larger to compensate. Sonic Advance 2 was Cream the Rabbit's first playable appearance in a video game. She was originally created to fill the role of Team Rose's flying character in Sonic Heroes, but ended up making her debut in Sonic Advance 2, a whole year before Heroes released. She was added to the sequel to distinguish it more from the first Advance title. Sega also wanted her to debut in a game before she appeared in the upcoming Sonic X anime series. Technically, Cream's first appearance in a game was even earlier, in the Sonic Mega Collection Extras menu. The character went through a few incarnations as a squirrel and a raccoon before the rabbit design was settled on. She was designed to be easy for beginners to play. Her Chow Cheese will home in on the enemies to deal damage, allowing Cream to stay out of danger as she does so. She attacks this way because Yuji Naka felt that it damaged the character's cute image if she attacked enemies by herself. Advance 2's Music Plant Zone may be inspired by a similar area from a previous Sonic Team game, Ristar's Planet Sonata. Sonic and Ristar even share very similar poses and animations when they're launched off a spring in these levels. Sonic Mega Collection also showcased a trailer for Sonic Advance 2 that featured music not heard anywhere in the game. Sonic Advance 2 also features a track that went unused in the first game's data. The track seems to be an alternate invincibility theme and replaced the traditional invincibility tune in both Sonic Advance 2 and 3. The 2011 Android port of Sonic Advance also uses a different invincibility tune that's a remix of the game's title theme, and several other tracks were swapped out for new music, including the tracks for the X-Zone fights. Interestingly, all the replaced GBA tunes were remixes of tracks from Sonic 1 and 2 on Genesis. These alterations may be linked to a larger issue with Sonic, Sega, and composer Masato Nakamura. The tracks Nakamura made for Sonic 1 and 2, and even remixes of the music, are rarely used in modern Sonic games. It's speculated that this is because Nakamura owns the copyright to these tracks himself, and Sega must pay him royalties whenever they're used. Sonic Advance 3 was the final game in the Sonic series to feature the original voice cast that debuted in Sonic Adventure. From Shadow the Hedgehog onwards, they were replaced by the 4Kids cast that dubbed Sonic X. The game also marked the last time Eggman's voice actor, Dean Bristow, would record new lines for the character before he passed on. Dedicated Sonic fans assume that Bristow's passing is what made Sega replace the existing voice lineup with the Sonic X cast, but this isn't the case. In 2008, Sonic fan site SonicScene.net interviewed Eggman's current voice actor, Mike Pollock. Pollock revealed in the interview that the choice to replace the Sonic Adventure cast with Sonic X's was made before Bristow passed away. Pollock said it was strictly a business decision, which also lines up with statements from Simon Jeffrey, who was president of Sega of America from 2005 to 2009. Jeffrey told SonicStadium.org, "Sega of America are a subsidiary of Sega of Japan. They reside in Japan and do not come under my jurisdiction at all. Likewise, I know this will make you all mad. Sega of America has no say in the voice casting. Absolutely none." One thing that set Sonic Advance 3 apart from the first two games was its use of teams, and according to an interview with IGN, it was Yuji Naka who conceived this partner system. It wasn't the first time in the Advance series that players could use two characters at once, however. By using a cheat code on the original original Sonic Advance's character select screen, it's possible to play as Sonic with Tails following him, like in Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Sonic Advance 3 was planned internally at Sonic Team, but was again exported to DIMPS because of a lack of staff and resources at Sega. The Sonic Advance series contains a number of musical references to other games in the series. The Invincibility jingle in the first Sonic Advance is a remix of the Invincibility jingle in Sonic 1 and 2. Ice Paradise remixes the minigame music from Sonic Advance's Tiny Chow Garden. Sunset Hill Zone from Sonic Advance 3 is a remix of Green Hill Zone from the original Sonic the Hedgehog, but it also takes its drum samples from Sonic Battle's Central City theme. Similarly, parts of Route 99 were remixed from Tails' Lab from Sonic Battle. Alter Emerald remixes Holy Summit, and the Secret Level Non-Aggression remixes E1215's theme from Sonic Battle. Sonic Battle is perhaps referenced so often in Sonic Advance 3's music because of the nature of its villain. G-Merle is based on Emerald, the copy robot that was a key character in Sonic Battle. Route 99 was referenced in issue 175 of Sonic the Comic, published in February 2000, 4 years before Sonic Advance 3 was released. As Sega had little to do with the production of a British licensed tie-in, this was most likely a coincidence. Did you know? Mario was considered as a possible character for the Wii version of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. The plan was dropped, as Sumo Digital didn't want to cross-contaminate All-Stars Racing with the Mario and Sonic series. The game was also planned to feature more obscure characters. Golden Axe's Gilius Thunderhead was originally considered for the game. Soon after Sumo completed work on Sega Superstars Tennis, they were asked to work on another Sega-themed game. They decided to make this new title a racing game, partly due to their experience working on the Outrun series. Sumo also drew inspiration from the Mario Kart series, Diddy Kong Racing, Sega Rally Revo, and Forza. An early version of the game had Sonic racing on foot, Eggman using a walking mech, Tails driving the Tornado, Amy in a similar vehicle to Sonic R, and Gilius Thunderhead riding a chicken leg. However, Sumo decided that bipedal characters made the game less fun to play. Drifting looked unnatural on foot, and there was a huge size difference between characters that did or didn't have a vehicle. They decided to rework the game, and Gilius was dropped during one of the revisions. The loading screens in Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing have tips under the title, Sonic Says. This is a possible reference to a segment from the 1993 cartoon, The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. Speaking of old Sonic cartoons, the Wii and PC versions of the game contain an interesting mistake. The cards on the floor of Roulette Road don't have Amy Rose as the Queen of Diamonds, but Sonia the Hedgehog instead. This is Sonic's sister from the 1999 cartoon Sonic Underground. Fans quickly noted the image was identical to Sonia fan art by DeviantArt user Lightning Duchess. The connection between the two is confirmed by the game's executive producer, Steve Lysette, who apologized for using the art without permission. In his apology, Lysette explained that an artist looked for official art to use as a placeholder, but mistook the fan art for official art of Amy. When the game was sent to Sonic Team for approval, they caught the error and asked Sumo Digital to fix the image. While the texture was corrected in the HD versions of the game, the team overlooked the mistake in both the Wii version and the PC version at low graphics settings. While the artwork was patched out of the PC version, there was no practical way to correct the Wii version due to its limited online functions. After the game's announcement in May 2009, fans learned that the character Knights wouldn't appear in All-Stars Racing. In response, the fan site KnightsIntoDreams.com launched the Don't Forget Knights campaign, intending to show that Knights still had a dedicated fan base and was worthy of inclusion. While the game was too far along in development to include Knights, Sumo still had the character's assets from Sega Superstars Tennis. They responded to fans by having Knights cameo as a flag bearer. Knights, Riala, and the Dream Valley stage were also included in the sequel, Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed. The flag bearer position, however, was given to Rystar, an often overlooked Sonic Team character. Bayonetta was also planned for inclusion in All-Stars Racing Transformed, but was ultimately rejected. Bayonetta's character has an adult tone, and developers feared that including her would raise the game's age rating. Throughout development, Sumo needed Sega's approval when implementing characters and locations. However, rather than being referred to a committee, Sumo had to get approval from the developers of each franchise. Sega did this to make sure characters were as true to their original games as possible. At one point, the team had to present the level Rogue's Landing to Shuntaro Tanaka, the director of Skies of Arcadia. Despite his cold exterior during the presentation, Tanaka was allegedly so overjoyed by how well they captured Arcadia that he began to cry. Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed was announced on April 30th, 2012, a few months after the launch of Mario Kart 7 for the Nintendo 3DS. Similarities were immediately drawn between the two, with both games' major selling points being their seamless transition between land, sea, and sky during races. However, Transformed had been conceived long before Mario Kart 7 was revealed at E3 2011. Lysette told Edge magazine, "They weren't doing the same thing, but it was a bit of a shame because ours was coming later and it looked like we'd copied them. We never thought they'd do something like that." The team initially had trouble making the water racing segments. They tried realistic water physics at first, similar to Nintendo's Wave Racer series. Sumo didn't feel like this fit, however, and after almost 50 revisions, they settled on something similar to Midway's Hydro Thunder. The team also had issues with the flight segments. They originally created a course based on Sonic Heroes' Seaside Hill to experiment with flight, land, and water racing. Players could fly freely, but this made it hard to give the user any direction. This problem was resolved when Sumo scrapped the Sonic level and created a course based on Panzer Dragoon. The flight area of this track was placed in a canyon, which limited players' options and gave them a natural direction to follow. Sumo also had trouble unifying the game's controls. Originally, each segment of the track felt like a completely different game, and it wasn't until a year and a half later that Sumo finalized the controls. The team also considered adding a story mode in Transformed. This mode featured a villain, kidnapping characters from various Sega universes and forcing them to race for his own amusement. At the end of this mode, the villain would be revealed as Dr. Eggman in disguise. Ultimately, Sumo believed there was no good reason for these characters coming together and abandoned the idea. They also worried about the cost of acting and animation for cutscenes, which only gave them more reason to scrap the story. On the official Sega forums, Steve Lysette issued fans a challenge. If they made a poll and 1,000 people wanted a particular character to be playable, he'd ask Sega if they could be in the game. Fans made the poll, and characters that reached over 1,000 votes included Hatsune Miku, Vector Man, Rystar, ToeJam and Earl, Bayonetta, and the Japanese Sega Saturn mascot, Segata Sanshiro. Eventually, Shenmue's Ryo Hazuki was approved by Sega. This was possible due to him appearing in All-Stars Racing, and a lot of his assets could be reused. Although Ryo was the only character to make a playable appearance, Segata Sanshiro did make a cameo in the game's Race of Ages track. He can be seen in the background when the player completes a lap in first place, riding a missile with a giant Sega Saturn on his back. These are references to his bizarre commercials, the last of which showed him saving Sega HQ from a missile attack. In December 2013, Simon Honeydew Lane of the YouTube channel Yogscast was added to Transformed. This was part of a charity drive to aid Special Effect, a charity that helps people with disabilities play video games. The character Ages makes numerous allusions to other Sega properties. In its boat form, it's shaped like a Dreamcast controller. As a car, it takes the form of the Hornet from Daytona, USA. And in the air, it takes the form of an F-14 Tomcat jet, referencing Afterburner. Humorously, Age's boat form sounds like the Dreamcast's infamously loud disc reader. Did you know? Several mistakes in the Sonic franchise can be found before even booting up a game. The North American Wii version of Sonic Colors includes a spelling mistake on the back of the game box, with the word perform misspelled in the line "and preform new moves." Additionally, the game's instruction manual accidentally misspells Nega-Wisp as Mega-Wisp. The back of Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection's case also has a mistake. The box shows 4 games, with the screenshot on the top left supposedly being from Sonic the Hedgehog 2. However, it's actually an image of the Flamecraft fight during Angel Island Zone Act 1 from Sonic 3 and Knuckles. 2006's Sonic the Hedgehog instruction manual has a number of mistakes as well. It erroneously states the game includes a shield power-up that functions identically to other games in the series. However, this power-up is not in the final game. The manual states that Tails and Omega have a flight gauge that will lower as they fly or hover. It also states that using Sonic's gem powers will cause the action gauge to deplete, but this is untrue. Another mistake appears in the cutscene where Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles return to the past. Sonic picks up a newspaper called the Daily Soriana, referring to the town of Soleana. This is presumably because of the lack of distinction between R and L sounds in Japanese. A similar error can be found in Sonic Rush, where Blaze's voice actress Bella Hudson is credited as Bera Hudson. Another typo caused Sega some embarrassment in 2015. During the Halloween special stage event for Sonic Runners, the developers issued an apology to players over the character Boo, who they had incorrectly referred to as Boob. Even the first Sonic the Hedgehog game has a handful of mistakes. The Japanese version of the original Sonic released later than the Western version, and had several fixes to improve the game. The Japanese version, known as Rev 01, has more layers of parallax scrolling in most levels, adding a greater sense of depth. Rev 01 also corrects several known errors. For example, the revision fixed an error in the zone order on the stage select screen. In the original version, the zone ordering creates a smooth transition from natural landscapes to urban backgrounds as the levels progress. As such, Labyrinth Zone appears after Green Hill Zone as the second area. However, Labyrinth Zone isn't actually playable until Zone 4, possibly because it was too difficult to be the second level of the game. In the updated Japanese version, the stage select screen moves Labyrinth Zone to its correct position. Despite these corrections, there's still a known error in the game. Moving very quickly can result in the screen not scrolling fast enough to keep up. In Green Hill Zone Act 1, the player can move so quickly the screen doesn't scroll down fast enough, resulting in a death by hitting the kill plane at the bottom of the screen. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 also contains a mistake with its stage select. The game features seamless level transitions, such as when going from Marble Garden Zone to Carnival Night Zone, where the sky slowly darkens. But when transitioning from Carnival Night Zone to Ice Cap Zone, the scene suddenly switches from night to day. This is because originally the Flying Battery Zone from Sonic and Knuckles was supposed to go in between Carnival Night Zone and Ice Cap Zone to account for the change. As stated in the Sonic Jam official guidebook, at the end of Flying Battery Zone, Sonic would have knocked out a door, which would then be used as a snowboard at the beginning of Ice Cap Zone Act 1. Due to time constraints, Flying Battery Zone was cut from Sonic 3 and was instead featured in Sonic and Knuckles. As a remnant of this, Flying Battery Zone can still be found in Sonic 3's stage select. In Sonic 3 and Knuckles, completing a level with a time of 9 minutes and 59 seconds, a second off receiving a time over, will grant the player a time bonus of 100,000 points. It's unclear whether this was a mistake or an Easter egg to reward the player for cutting it so close. Regardless, the feature was carried over into Sonic Mania. While Robotnik is supposed to be invincible during cutscenes, it's possible to kill him if the player manages to hit him 256 times. This will cause the hit counter to reduce down to 0, where he'll be destroyed. This is most easily done with Tails. In the West, Dr. Eggman was known as Dr. Robotnik until the release of Sonic Adventure in 1999. However, some references to the name Eggman managed to slip through the cracks. Many of the names of Robotnik's machines are egg-themed, like Egg Robo, Death Egg, and the Eggmobile. The name Eggman 01 can be seen emblazoned on the side of Wing Fortress Zone in Sonic 2. Interestingly, the opposite has also happened in Japan. The Sonic Triple Trouble level, Robotnik Winter, keeps its name in Japan, even though Eggman was never called Robotnik in the East. Robotnik caused even more confusion with his appearance on the cover of Sonic 2. In the West, the cover showed Robotnik looming in the background. However, instead of sporting his blue spectacles, he instead has a full beard, no glasses, and hollow black eyes. These black eyes were mistakenly based on his appearance in-game. Presumably due to palette limitations, Robotnik's specs appear black rather than blue. His eyes seem to have been misinterpreted by an artist as black voids rather than glasses due to the sprites. This appearance may have influenced the character's design in other Western tie-in media, such as Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog and Sonic the Hedgehog Sat-AM, both of which feature Robotnik with black and red eyes. Another localization flub can be found in the manual of Sonic CD regarding the character Amy Rose. The Japanese manual calls her Rosie the Rascal, a nickname that makes appearances throughout the series. The American version mistakenly refers to her as Princess Sally, possibly to tie the game to the Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon. Translation is tricky, with slightly altered lines often giving a scene a different tone or intent to the original. The Sonic series is no stranger to this. Sonic Forces contained some English localization that gained notoriety among the fanbase. Among those lines was a section where Silver states Tails has lost it. In Japanese, the intent is a bit different, with Silver simply saying Tails had gone missing, as in being lost. In Sonic Adventure 2, when seeing the Bio Lizard teleport, Shadow asks, "Is that what Chaos Control is?" The line is slightly awkward and implies that the Bio Lizard is using a more advanced or perfected version of the technique. However, this was mistranslated slightly from the original, where Shadow simply states, "That was Chaos Control." It's stated multiple times in the franchise that Knuckles is an echidna. However, in Knuckles' theme song for the original Sonic Adventure, unknown from ME, he erroneously refers to himself as a porcupine, another spiny mammal. This may have been a decision made to better fit the rhythm of the verse. Another mistake can be found in Sonic's story. After reuniting with Sonic and Tails' story at Red Mountain, Sonic jumps up to board the Tornado 2. In Sonic's story, however, he stands in place, then suddenly appears on the plane afterwards. This is because Sonic never transitions from one animation to another, leaving him standing in place. When a few issues with the scene are amended, Sonic will board the plane with a jump, like in Tails' story. The game also has a persistent camera glitch, where the camera is placed behind the character instead of in its intended position. When appearing at the altar of the emeralds, the transition from the previous scene prevents the proper camera from being used. Some hackers have managed to correct the camera, revealing the intended angle for several scenes. This bug appeared in the DX GameCube version, but was fixed in later ports of the game. In the PC version of Sonic Heroes, some voice lines that were supposed to be heard won't load at all, most notably Team Cream's A-Rank line. In fact, many voice files were left empty in the PC version for unknown reasons. However, subtitles for some of these lines still appear. Another voiceover mistake comes when defeating the Robot Carnival boss. Dr. Eggman will say the line, "Don't get so excited, boys," even while addressing the teams with female members, Team Dark and Team Rose. In the NSTCU PlayStation 2 version of Heroes, the localization team neglected to switch the functions of X and Circle. In Japan, circle means accept or correct, while X means wrong or back. This isn't the same in English, and so usually the two buttons' functions are swapped. The change was corrected in PAL versions of Heroes. Some mistakes in Sonic games weren't entirely the fault of Sega. To promote Sonic and the Black Knight, Sega held a fan art contest. Winning entrants would get a free copy of the game and have their artwork displayed in the game's special gallery mode. Unfortunately, one of the winners was found to have traced his image from another fan artist, Mega777. The winner was quickly disqualified, and he posted a full apology on the Sonic Italia message boards, claiming he thought Sega would have checked for any evidence of wrongdoing. While Sega attempted to get in touch with Mega777, offering to send her the game and some swag as an apology, they also stated they would not be updating the game to correct the mistake. Thus, the wrong person remains credited in Sonic and the Black Knight to this day.
Did you know? The Sonic franchise's Chaos Emeralds aren't actually emeralds. Precious gems are categorized into emeralds, rubies, diamonds, etc. based mainly on the gem's color and how they are cut. And since the Chaos Emeralds are all different colors, it can be assumed the Chaos Emeralds get their names from the way they are cut. However, these gems don't use the Emerald Cut classification. In most Sonic games, the Chaos Emeralds either use a Brilliant or Single Cut, which are usually reserved for diamonds. This means that they should actually be called the Chaos Diamonds. The Sonic franchise has a long history of secrets, starting with some of their earliest games. Shortly after the US debut of Sonic Spinball, a second version of the game was released. This version removed 2 tracks from the original game's soundtrack, which were remixed and taken directly from the original Sonic the Hedgehog game. Their removal was due to Sega not actually owning the copyright to several tracks in the original Sonic, and likely forgetting to license the music for Sonic Spinball. These tracks were composed by Dreams Come True, a Japanese band who even made the original Green Hill Zone theme. Interestingly, Sonic's first public appearance is linked to the band, and was revealed on the side of the band's tour bus on November 7th, 1990. Another early fact has to do with Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, which is a modified version of the Japanese exclusive Puyo Puyo released on the Genesis. While the initial training levels from Puyo Puyo were removed after being converted into a Sonic game, the levels are still within the game's data. By modifying this data, it's possible to reinsert the levels, though with a number of errors such as glitched text, character misplacement, and no music at all. A bizarre result of this conversion is that it wouldn't be the only time Puyo Puyo was rebranded into another series. HAL Laboratory and Compile released their own modified version of Puyo Puyo, Kirby's Avalanche, which released a year and a half later. This meant that 2 first-party franchises, Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog and Nintendo's Kirby, contained virtually identical assets. While the arcade Sonic title, SegaSonic the Hedgehog, was released internationally in 1993, the game was never actually translated for countries outside of Japan. However, within the game's data are unused sprites of Dr. Robotnik that imply an English localization was worked on. These sprites would have seen Robotnik's design changed to that of the Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon appearance, which might have been more familiar to American fans at the time. Another interesting secret from early Sonic games can be found in Sonic CD. The game's first boss fight is against the EGG HVC001. The latter half of the boss's name, HVC001, is the model number of the Nintendo Famicom. This could have actually been a joke at Nintendo's expense, as the EGG HVC001 is also the first and easiest boss in the game. These types of secrets can also be found in the franchise's newer games, including the recent Sonic Mania. In versions of Mania prior to patch version 1.03.0919, there's an Easter egg based on the popular YouTube personality Video Game Donkey. The Easter egg is activated by latching to a chain in Hydro's City Zone Act 1, and inputting the Sonic 3 and Knuckles level select code left 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 right 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 up up up. Once active, when the player passes through a speed booster, instead of the usual sound effect, a voice clip of Donkey will play instead. Sonic Colors also has a few secrets. In one of Eggman's PA announcements in the Asteroid Coaster area, he will say,
"Would the owner of a yellow car, license plate 1NOM155, please report to the main gate. Your vehicle is in the path of an asteroid, and it's about to get smashed." Never mind.
This is a reference to Axel and his taxi from Crazy Taxi, which has the license plate 1NOM155. Another secret can be found towards the end of Sonic Colors. During the game's final cutscene, the camera will give a brief glimpse at Tails' computer. On the screen are 3 sets of hexadecimal numbers. Whilst Tails translates the first 2 sets, the third goes untranslated. When interpreted as Shift JIS encoded text, this translates to English as, "If you can read this, you're a geek." Yet another nod can be found in the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 versions of Sonic Unleashed's daytime Spagonia stage, Rooftop Run. In the stage, a pedestrian can be found reading a newspaper. Taking a closer look at the paper, it's possible to see a low-quality black and white image of 2006's Sonic the Hedgehog's box art on the top right of the page. During development of Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood, Sega of Europe held a contest which let fans name one of the game's groups of enemies. The contest was titled Sonic Chronicles: A Race to Name, and was won by Sega fan site Sega Nerds. The site found victory with their suggestion to call the enemies the Zoa, a reference to the town of the same name from Panzer Dragoon's saga. Sonic Chronicles also contains some unused dialogue within its data, though who would have spoken this line is unknown. The unused text reads, "Ha ha 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 ha! Holy crap, I'm a disembodied voice." Unused data can also be found in Knuckles Chaotix. The data contains a sprite of a bloody skull with Japanese text reading Tobu, meaning to fly or to jump. There is no evidence to explain what this graphic's purpose was, and it may simply be a joke by the game's developers. Knuckles Chaotix also has 6 collectible rings called the Chaos Rings, which originally had a different name. They were initially called the Holy Rings. It seems likely that the rings were renamed in order to avoid any religious controversy. This was one of the earliest instances of censorship in the Sonic franchise, but many more would occur throughout the years. One early example of self-censoring happened during development of Sonic 3. According to the game's tester, Jay Pataki, the "Get Blue Spheres" message at the start of the special stages originally said "Get Blue Balls." The text was changed after the mostly male staff believed that the original message had sexual undertones. Another Sonic game was completely reworked due to censorship. Sonic the Hedgehog's Game World on the Sega Pico was an educational game containing a total of 17 minigames. During the game's localization in the West, 6 of these games were removed entirely, and a number of the other games were censored. All references to gambling were removed, as well as games based on rock, paper, scissors and fortune telling. The background of the card matching memory game was also cut, as it was casino themed. A pre-release demo for Sonic Adventure, known as the Auto Demo, was made to showcase adventure with CPU gameplay, similar to the Attract mode in arcade games. However, players were able to modify the demo to be playable, and discovered several differences between the demo and the final release. One difference is that, in the demo, Amy's dress folds up to reveal her underwear when falling through the air after a jump. In the game's final release, this was adjusted to keep Amy's skirt at a more modest angle. Another change can be seen in the early prototype demo of Sonic Adventure 2, known as Sonic Adventure 2 The Trial, which was bundled with Phantasy Star Online for the Dreamcast. The game's first cutscene has a helicopter pilot ask, "What the hell?" while in the final release he simply exclaims, "What?" In a draft of the Sonic 06 script, it states that Blaze is bothered by her under-endowed chest, comments on which will rouse her anger. This was a character concept which was ultimately never implemented in the game, possibly to avoid negative repercussions.
Did you know that Dr. Eggman, also known as Dr. Ivo Robotnik, was originally designed to be a hero, not a villain? At the start of the 16-bit era, Sega desperately wanted to dominate the console market and beat Nintendo. They thought the best strategy to reach this goal would be creating a franchise that could outshine the Super Mario Brothers. Sega organized an internal competition for a new mascot to be the face of the franchise, and the design of Sonic the Hedgehog ultimately won out. But Sonic was only one of many designs put forward. One design was of a chubby egg-shaped man with a huge mustache wearing pajamas. The team at Sega loved the character and didn't want to simply throw it away. His design was reworked to look more like an antagonist and became the Doctor we all know today. At the title screen of Sonic CD, entering down, 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 left, right, A will take you to the game's sound test. Putting certain codes into the sound test can take you to several hidden screens in the game. One screen is of Tails saying, "See you next game," and another is an image of Sonic with big gray eyes and Japanese text saying, "You are cool." More interesting, however, are the other screens you could bring up. A bizarre tribute to Batman, a DJ scene with Eggman, Metal Sonic and Sonic, and finally a screen full of disturbing-looking Sonics with some Japanese texts that reads, "Fun is infinite with Sega Enterprises. Majin." Majin can be interpreted as demon or devil. This screen would also be displayed when attempting to play early pirated copies of the game. Sonic CD has another interesting quirk. Waiting for 3 minutes without touching the controller will cause Sonic to say, "I'm out of here," then jump off screen, giving the player a game over. Something similar was implemented in Knuckles Chaotix. If the player stands perfectly still for 60 seconds, Metal Sonic will appear out of nowhere and attack. In the Jet Set Radio franchise, there's a recurring character called Garib, and in the first game, he can be seen wearing a necklace with some kind of artifact on it. In an interview with Games TM, Jet Set Radio's art director Ryuto Ueda gave some insight as to what the object was. He stated that it's the skull of another famous Sega character. Looking closer at the necklace, this skull is blue and has spikes rolling down the back of it. The artifact is actually the skull of Sonic the Hedgehog. Did you know? Sonic's trademark speed was actually inspired by the original Super Mario Bros. In issue 260 of Nintendo Power, Sonic's co-creator Yuji Naka revealed the initial concept for Sonic the Hedgehog's fast gameplay came from playing level 1-1 of Super Mario Bros. Over and over again as fast as he could, since you always had to play the level first regardless of whether you used warp zones or not. Naka said, "I always tried to get through the level as fast as I could, and that inspired the initial concept for Sonic the Hedgehog." Sonic's design itself had different inspirations. Sonic's shoes were inspired by Michael Jackson's boots and the color scheme of Santa Claus. Sonic's personality was, interestingly, inspired by the 42nd President of the United States, Bill Clinton. Michael Jackson has other connections to the Sonic franchise. According to Sega Technical Institute director Roger Hector, Jackson was initially brought in during the development of Sonic 3 to compose some music, even though his involvement was never mentioned in any of the game's credits. Jackson's removal was supposedly due to the child abuse allegations against him that arose at that time, and his removal led to the music being reworked. In December 2009, Jackson's composer Bradley Buxer, who is credited in Sonic 3 as Brad Buxer, told French magazine Black and White that Jackson was involved with some of Sonic 3's compositions, and was supposedly not credited because he wasn't happy with how the Genesis' lacking sound chip handled the music. More Sonic games have interesting stories surrounding their soundtracks. Hideki Naganuma, who composed most of the music for Sonic Rush, usually sampled audio from many other mediums when making his music. For Sonic Rush, Naganuma sampled audio from at least 14 other creations. An obvious sample is in the track Back to Back, which uses the main melody from Louie Louie. Others are harder to spot, such as the track Wrapped in Black, which bizarrely uses audio sampled from a speech by human rights activist Malcolm X. Sonic's popularity reached farther than most video game icons. In 1993, Sonic the Hedgehog was chosen to be the first video game character in the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade. Unfortunately, the balloon popped on its one and only flight by being pushed into a lamppost by strong gusts of wind, hurting a child and a police officer on its descent. Because of this, the balloon was retired. A differently designed Sonic came back in 2011 and has been there since. Sonic also won the award of the longest-running video game comic in 2008. Archie Comics made over 200 issues, including specials. Sonic's comic started in 1993 and is still going today. Sonic has even influenced the naming of scientific discoveries. There's a gene called Sonic Hedgehog, named after Sonic himself. The gene also has an inhibitor, something that can stop the process of a gene, named Robotnikin, named after Sonic's nemesis, Dr. Ivo Eggman Robotnik. A lot of the content in Sonic games has also been reworked, and sometimes cut entirely. In the original Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic was going to wear goggles. The goggles can still be found in the game's ROM. It was originally thought they were an item that helped Sonic breathe underwater, but one of the game's developers, Dean Sitton, stated the goggles were simply a cosmetic change and appeared whenever Sonic was underwater. There's also a cut enemy in the game's data, named Splats. Splats has no programming attached to it. Interestingly, Splats appeared several times in promotions during Sonic's development. It was featured in a set of promotional trading cards for the game, on the box of a collection of Japanese Sonic figures, and was even featured in Sonic the Comic and Archie Comics' Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic 2 has several cut areas. The most well-known cut area is Hidden Palace Zone. Hidden Palace Zone was never completed, but most of the first act is playable in 2 of the game's known prototype builds. It was one of the first zones created, but wasn't updated much after the initial phase of development. Yuji Naka revealed the zone was originally going to be a place where the player would warp to after collecting all 7 Chaos Emeralds. The player would then be able to transform into Super Sonic, but the idea was ultimately scrapped and the ability to transform into Super Sonic was given to the player from the get-go. The zone is accessible in the final version of Sonic 2 by using a Game Genie code, but almost all of the artwork is missing and the zone is essentially unplayable. The zone also had 3 enemies that were ultimately unused, 2 dinosaurs resembling some kind of theropod and a stegosaurus, and a bat. There was also a forest level called Wood Zone that seemed to have been worked on for a longer time than the Hidden Palace Zone, and a desert area called Dust Hill Zone. Dust Hill Zone seemed to be based on American deserts and was cut due to time constraints. Another zone named by fans, Rock Zone, was going to be Dust Hill Zone but at a previous point in time. There was also going to be a winter-themed zone based on Dust Hill Zone, where all the cacti were replaced with Christmas trees. Metropolis Zone was originally only 2 acts long, but it became 3 when another zone was reworked and merged with it. This zone was called Genocide City Zone. Level designer Tom Payne said the name was chosen by the Japanese developers who didn't have a strong grasp on the English language. The zone was renamed to Cyber City Zone to be less offensive before being reworked and merged with the Metropolis Zone. Even entire games in the franchise have been reworked. Sonic 2 and Sonic CD were originally planned to be essentially the same game, as were Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles. Sonic 2 and Sonic CD naturally grew apart and became separate games because the developers were in 2 different locations, but Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles became 2 separate games because of time constraints and manufacturing costs. Splitting the game into 2 parts gave the team more time to finish the second half. Sonic and the Secret Ring started out as a port of 2006's Sonic the Hedgehog, but Sega wanted to focus on a game for the Wii's launch that focused on the Wii controller's capabilities. They ultimately decided to change it into something entirely new.
Today we'll be taking a look at some obscure games about that blue streak speeding by, Sonic the Hedgehog. It cannot be denied that Sega had a huge impact on the gaming landscape with their spiky blue mascot. Not only was Sonic the first video game character to be featured in the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade, but it also sparked a wave of animal mascot games, some of which are actually good and not Bubsy. He also inspired and encouraged a dedicated and eccentric fandom. But while Sega is known for having a relaxed relationship with their fanbase, and there are certainly some interesting fan-made games out there worth talking about, for this video we'll be sticking only to official games. In 2001, Sega launched their Japanese exclusive Sonic Cafe phone service, offering a number of games for the iApply line of phones from NTT Docomo, for a monthly subscription of 315 yen, or approximately $2 at the time. While a select number of games featured on the service did make it to Europe and the US on the Sega mobile service, such as ports of classic Sonic games, many of them stayed in Japan. Some noteworthy games include Sonic Racing Shift Up, in which the player attempts to shift gears in a racing kart. The goal of the game was to get the timing on the gear changes as precise as possible, and there was a system where data could be sent and received from a remote server to compete with other players. Another title on the service was Nakayoshi Chow, or Good Friend Chow, a virtual pet game where the player raises a Chow, similar to the Chow Garden featured in a number of main console games. The player is tasked with keeping their Chow happy by petting it and talking to it. The game also includes wallpapers that can be downloaded for your phone.
At the time of this recording, this is the only child-specific game to be released with full color graphics. A very simple kart racer featuring Sonic, titled Sonic Racing Kart, was also available on the service. The game would automatically accelerate and the player would simply steer left and right. Interestingly, only 3 months after release, the sequel, Sonic Racing Kart 3DX, was also published. As the title implies, 3DX features much of the same gameplay, but this time is in 3D. These two games also depict Sonic in a rather more traditional style go-kart, where in other games he's shown almost exclusively driving a racing car. Sonic Cafe also included an assortment of card and puzzle games simply featuring Sonic characters, which are too numerous to list here, but rest assured, they truly live up to exactly what you'd expect to get for just $2 a month. Interestingly, the service included a port of the classic 1984 arcade game Flicky, which many players might not realize is the origin for the birds known as Flickies in the Sonic franchise, despite being released 6 years before the first Sonic the Hedgehog game. Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car, or Harinozumi Sonic no Omawari-san, literally meaning Hedgehog Sonic the Police Officer, is a 1991 children's arcade game featuring Sonic as a police officer driving a patrol car and protecting the city from Dr. Eggman. The game itself is presented inside a rideable arcade cabinet shaped like a police car, which tilts left and right during gameplay. It features a steering wheel with control movement, an indicator arm, a jump button, and a button to turn on the siren and start the game. Despite being designed for children, the cabinet can comfortably fit 2 adults, presumably so that parents could easily supervise young children while playing. After an introductory speech by Sonic, the player is given free rein to control the car as it drives around the city, stopping periodically to allow groups of animals to cross the road. After a short period of time, Dr. Eggman makes an appearance, and while in other games he focuses on obtaining the Chaos Emeralds, conquering the world, or having a bean machine, in this game he commits his greatest act of evil to date, disrupting traffic. Once Eggman is defeated and makes his escape, Sonic returns to the police station and the player is given a rating out of 5 stars, with one gameplay session lasting around 2 minutes. Surprisingly, this is the first Sonic game to feature voice acting, with Takeshi Kusao and Masaharu Sato performing as Sonic and Dr. Eggman respectively, both of whom reprised their roles in later games. While both a Japanese and English version of the game were made, the English version was never exported outside of Japan and may have been intended for areas in Japan with high numbers of English-speaking tourists. Moving on from police cars to spaceships, SegaSonic Cosmo Fighter, also known as SegaSonic Cosmo Fighter Galaxy Patrol, was developed by the same team as Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car. Unsurprisingly, it's similar to Sonic Patrol Car in many ways, being a children's arcade game in a tilting rideable cabinet. However, the actual game is far more advanced and features top-down shoot-'em-up gameplay rather than the sedate driving mechanics from Patrol Car. This time, the controls include buttons for firing regular projectiles and rockets, and a speed-up lever which tilts the whole ride forward, along with a regular joystick that moves the player left to right, along with tilting the cabinet to match. And while the previous game heavily borrowed assets from existing games, Cosmo Fighter has its own unique graphics and a surprisingly good soundtrack. The game focuses on Sonic rescuing a space station full of animals from an attack by Dr. Eggman, who will throw bombs and other obstacles at Sonic to try and stop him. Once the player reaches the space station, Eggman will ram Sonic's ship, and after the player does enough damage, he'll then transform his pod into a giant green robot, with the player needing to destroy both arms and the head to finally win. The player is then rewarded with a short animation of Sonic flying past the station and thanking them for help, followed again by a rating out of 5 stars. But perhaps the most unusual thing to come out of this arcade development branch of Sega is the SegaSonic Popcorn Shop, a popcorn vending machine featuring a minigame of Sonic and Tails in a popcorn factory. After inserting their money, the customer is prompted to select one of 3 flavors: butter, salted, or curry. After the selection is made, Tails places popcorn kernels onto a conveyor belt and Sonic turns it on. but as they begin moving along the belt, Dr. Eggman appears from off-screen to reverse the direction. Sonic grabs the popcorn kettle and starts running along the conveyor belt while being chased by Dr. Eggman, now wielding a large mallet. The player is encouraged to turn a green crank on the cabinet to make Sonic run faster and escape Eggman. After reaching the end of the belt, Sonic slides down a chute and drops popcorn kernels into a burning stove, where the player is then able to turn the same green crank to help Tails cook the popcorn while Dr. Eggman tries to steal it as it pops. During this segment, the actual popcorn is being cooked inside the cabinet, and the game ends with Tails walking off screen with the cup of popcorn that is then dispensed to the player. That said, the game itself is largely irrelevant, with the popcorn being dispensed regardless of any input from the player beyond the initial flavor selection. However, it still includes full voice acting from the previously mentioned Kusao and Sato, and it even has its own error screen should it malfunction, showing Tails being chased by Eggman and Sonic telling you to call for a shop assistant. While it might seem a little strange at first, popcorn is actually a very popular snack in Japan, so their choice of product isn't as random as it might seem. Similarly, the option for a curry flavour is normal in the region, and would only seem strange to a more Western audience. However, in an email to the now defunct gaming site UK Resistant in 2007, one man recounted his experience with a SegaSonic popcorn shop during a trip to Osaka, Japan. Quote, "The butter popcorn tasted like shit and made my hands really greasy, so I wouldn't recommend it." Moving away from children's games and vending machines and onto games for a more mature audience. Unveiled in 2013 at the Tokyo-based Joypolis arcade, Sonic Athletics is a huge multiplayer arcade game, and we really do mean huge. It features individual screens and treadmills for each playable character, allowing up to 8 players to race each other simultaneously. Players can choose to play as Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, Shadow, Metal Sonic, Silver, and Blaze, simply by using the appropriate treadmill. Surprisingly, the gameplay is not exclusively racing, and the cabinet actually has 3 different game modes: 100-meter dash, 110-meter hurdles, and a long jump. Fortunately for players, developers mercifully included a jump button, so the player is never actually required to leave the ground. In 2013, the Joypolis arcade also released Sonic Ghost Shooting, part arcade game, part ride. While very little information is actually available about this arcade attraction, what is known is that it's an interactive dark ride game which borrows elements from Pyramid Cave and Pumpkin Hill from Sonic Adventure 2, with each player using a light gun to shoot at ghosts during the ride, with 6 cars holding 2 people each, allowing up to 12 players at once. That same year, they also released Sonic Brain Ranking, running from the 24th of October 2013 to the 10th of January 2018, a Green Hill Zone themed area where players answered questions in the style of a quiz show. Each game lasted for 5 rounds, and players were encouraged to enter as a family or team, with the winner receiving a prize at the game's end. Along with these games, the Joypolis arcades in both Tokyo and Qingdao have also featured some unique Sonic-themed merchandise and events over the years, along with other smaller attractions. These include carnival games, UFO catchers, bumper cars, and even hot air balloon rides, with the Qingdao venue famously featuring a giant statue of the iconic character on its roof, a must-see for any die-hard Sonic or Sega fans.
Sonic the Hedgehog, a video game superstar who was perhaps considered one of the strongest icons of gaming, and though more recently having fallen from grace, continues to have a strong presence within the industry. Games themselves, however, have evolved, and another icon of the industry was the stoic arcade machine, the tall structure that intimidated the young and the penniless. Nostalgia is an incredible thing, with many who have a keen interest in games wanting to explore the youth of the industry and see that which made it grow. So why then is there a Sonic the Hedgehog arcade game which has never seen publication in the huge number of compilations released by Sega for the many consoles over the many years? Well, let's find out together as we take a look at the classic Japanese arcade title, SegaSonic the Hedgehog. SegaSonic the Hedgehog was released in 1993, and though it could be found outside of Japan, it had an extremely limited run, to the point that those who frequented arcades at the time weren't even aware the machine existed, nor that it was ever released within their country. The cabinets that did make their way overseas were said to be entirely identical to their Japanese counterpart, to the point of having the game's text and voice acting entirely in Japanese as well. Not just in typical arcade game style, but also the style of Sonic the Hedgehog, the game's plot is mostly relegated to the back seat, only taking place as a means of giving some sort of explanation as to what the player's goals are as they play the game. The game's plot is delivered through cutscenes which play at the start of the game, as well as briefly occurring between stages. The game's story involves Sonic alongside two characters who were introduced to the Sonic franchise within this title, Ray the Flying Squirrel and Mighty the Armadillo. The trio have been kidnapped by Dr. Eggman and have been taken to Eggman Island, a hazardous environment infested with traps to keep the heroes occupied. The three anthropomorphic marathoners team up to better their chances of escape, working together to survive Eggman's perilous threats as they try to reach Eggman's tower. The game is viewed from an isometric perspective, unlike any Sonic game that had come before, but which would later be seen again with the likes of Sonic 3D. Unlike most games, SegaSonic is played with only a single button and a trackball, which must be rolled to move the characters on screen. By pushing this button, the player is able to perform the iconic Sonic spin jump. These controls are sometimes color-coded to the character which they operate, with some cabinets allowing for 3-player multiplayer. The game is broken up into 7 stages, all taking place on Eggman Island, with the player attempting to reach the end of each stage as quickly as possible, though, as with most Sonic games, his desire for speed can lead to a huge boost in difficulties in control. Courses are linear in nature and will throw an unfettering barrage of threats to heroes. There are only a few enemies scattered throughout the entire game, and on top of that, only one section that even remotely resembles a boss battle, found midway through the game. Most of the game's challenge is in avoiding hazards from the game's arenas. Unlike most Sonic titles, the player has a health gauge, though rings are still used as a way of regaining life. These rings are scattered throughout stages, as well as being hidden inside walls and obstacles. Unsurprisingly, rings are also used as a way of improving a player's score, with additional points being awarded should half of the stage's rings be collected. In multiplayer, the bonus is awarded to the player who collected the most rings. SegaSonic the Hedgehog's life is a curious one for fans of the series. Considering its relative obscurity, there is not a lot of information surrounding the events that led to its release. During the 90s, Sega was perhaps one of the biggest owners of arcades across not just Japan, but also worldwide. Their origins came from their extremely popular arcade titles, more so than their home consoles. Yet, their biggest mascot was made in the blue hedgehog Sonic, a character who could only be found attached to their home systems. It's believed that this was the reasoning behind Sonic's eventual appearance within SegaSonic for arcades, as it would give Sega's arcade connection some tie to their iconic mascot. As for the game's name, and the reason behind the inclusion of Sega attached to Sonic's name was due to a legal issue involving rival arcade manufacturer Taito. Taito filed a trademark application for their game Sonic Blastman on December 10th, 1990. This was exclusive to arcade video games and machines. However, 3 days before this, Sega also filed a trademark for Sonic, leading up to the upcoming release of their first game on the Genesis. This covered arcade video games, machines, and all kinds of merchandise. Japanese trademark applications take 2 to 3 years to process, so to avoid dispute, Sega filed a trademark for SegaSonic a year later on December 11th, 1991. Taito's trademark was approved 2 years after on June 30th, 1993. This specified that the trademark deal dealt exclusively with arcade punching games, medal games, coin pushers, and UFO catchers. However, it wasn't until 1996 that the Sonic trademark went through for Sega. Rumours of a home port of SegaSonic had circulated in the likes of gaming outlet CVG, with the suggestion that it may be converted for the Sega 32X, though this ultimately never came to fruition. Mighty would later go on to appear as a major role within Knuckles' Chaotix, as a playable character in 1995, 2 years after his limited debut. While Ray wouldn't show up for a significant number of years within Sonic's games, both he and Mighty would make continued appearances through the Sonic the Hedgehog comic series created by Archie Comics. The two characters were also referenced together within Sonic Generations, where they can both be seen on a missing persons poster in the City Escape stage. Ray and Mighty had been considered for an earlier playable reappearance within Sonic Heroes, appearing on a team alongside Metal Sonic, though this never came to fruition. In 2018, Sonic Mania Plus was announced, bringing both Ray and Mighty back into the limelight. This updated version of Sonic Mania gave players the chance to play as both heroes for the first time since Sega Sonic, which many would have never played at all. Ray's return was 25 years in the making, while Mighty's brief stint in Knuckles' Chaotix made his absence only 23 years. During an interview with Famitsu, Sonic series producer Takashi Iizuka spoke on the two characters being brought back into circulation. He considered them both as sealed characters, and that they wouldn't ever be added to a Sonic title again. But after many requests, they were, on top of the fact that with Sonic Mania, the team were squeezing in all series materials aimed for specific manias, so the stage for them to appear has already been prepared. Prior to their reappearances, the Sonic community had found a keen interest in both of these fallen stars, despite, or perhaps as a result of, their complete lack of fleshed-out background. It was likely that this interest was actually the true reason for both characters to be brought back into circulation, particularly within Sonic Mania, as the game was created as a way of appeasing fans of the classic Sonic franchise. SegaSonic was also the first game in the Sonic universe to give the characters voices. With Sonic's voice being supplied by famed Japanese voiceover artist Takeshi Kusao, best known for his work as Trunks from the Dragon Ball Z series, and Yusuke Numata portraying Mighty the Armadillo, also known for his work as a wide variety of characters from Dragon Ball as well. Rei was voiced by Hinako Kanemaru, a relatively unknown voice actress, otherwise known for her role as Yai from the Mega Man NT Warrior anime series, while Robotnik's voice was supplied by Masaharu Sato, who has worked on many shows, though again, probably best known as Master Roshi from Dragon Ball. It is clear by looking through the data of Sega Sonic that the game was definitely intended for an international release. Data. These include fully translated English dialogue boxes that would have appeared throughout the game, with one having the game's villain referred to as both Robotnik and Eggman, possibly as the team were unsure on which would be used should an international release be made. The limited international release meant that machines could only really be found in places such as the now permanently closed London Sega World, Arcade Odyssey in Miami, and Galloping Ghost Arcade in Chicago. Considering that these international machines are still without a specified regional version being programmed in, still retaining all Japanese, it's easy to say that Sega did not invest in an array of machines for international shipping. Those that did play the game considered it to be a worthwhile play, breaking expectations with a high level of polish on not just the game's graphics, gameplay, and audio, but the variety of design in its levels. The reason that such a highly praised game never saw any form of re-release, despite the less well-received arcade title Sonic the Fighters receiving a port, comes down to one very simple issue: controls. Yuji Naka, former head of Sonic Team, was asked by GameSpy in 2005, during the run-up to the release of Sonic Gems Collection, whether he had any involvement in the project and whether or not the game would see a place in the compilation. He stated, "That's another one that was developed outside of my control. It was done by part of the Sega arcade division at the time. We did think about adding it to Gems Collection though, but we couldn't implement it in the end because the game used a trackball control scheme that is very, very difficult to replicate with a standard controller." It is a pretty fun and unique little game though.
Did you know? Even though Chaos didn't appear until Sonic Adventure, the character may have been alluded to almost 5 years earlier. In Sonic the Hedgehog 3's Japanese game manual, it stated that Knuckles mistook the Death Egg for the literal egg of a legendary dragon. It was foretold on the Master Emerald's altar, presumably through images or hieroglyphs on the walls, that this dragon would emerge and destroy the world. Interestingly, the Lost World area in Sonic Adventure also has a mural of perfect chaos causing destruction. While Chaos is the guardian god of the Chao and a mutated Chao himself, this is never outright stated in Sonic Adventure. However, the original Japanese game had stronger hints of Chaos's ties to the Chao. In the Japanese game, Chaos can be heard making Chao sounds after he first appears in one of Tikal's flashbacks. In the international version, the sounds were removed. Although never confirmed, it's speculated that Dr. Eggman's name was inspired by the Beatles song I Am the Walrus. The song features the lyrics, I am the Eggman, they are the Eggmen. I am the Walrus, goo goo gajoo. Eggman's theme from Sonic Adventure 2 even references I am the Walrus with the line, I am the Eggman, it's what I am. In Sonic Rivals, Eggman Nega mentions that he's Eggman's descendant. However, Sonic Rush had previously framed the two Eggmans as counterparts from different dimensions. Many consider this as one of the most substantial continuity errors in the series, alongside how Blaze was said to be from the future in Sonic 06. How Nega managed to come back after being transformed into a card in Sonic Rivals is also unexplained in both Rivals 2 and Sonic Rush Adventure. Sonic Rivals 2's Metal Sonic 3.0 was made by Dr. Eggman Nega as an improved version of Metal Sonic. The character's design appears to just be Metal Sonic's leather costume from Sonic Rivals, but with a painted head. The two characters are so similar in appearance that American toy company Jazzwares plan to add Metal Sonic 3.0 to their Sonic toy range by reusing their existing Metal Sonic molds. However, Sega refused Jazzwares' request. Metal Sonic debuted in Sonic CD, which was developed in Japan while the majority of Sonic Team went to the United States to make Sonic 2. For the development of Sonic CD, designer Kazuyuki Hoshino was tasked with creating a pair of new characters to help flesh out Sonic's world. These characters were Amy Rose and Metal Sonic. Interestingly, work on a mechanical version of Sonic had already been worked on for Sonic 2. While it may be possible that Hoshino knew about Sonic 2's Mecha Sonic, which is an entirely different character, his design had a completely different and sleeker look. Hoshino's creation fit in with the world of Sonic so well that Metal Sonic would ultimately become an adversary to Sonic on the same level as Eggman. As a testament to Metal Sonic's impact on Sonic fans, one of the earliest ROM hacks ever made was a hack that replaced Sonic's sprite art with that of Metal Sonic. Although we've mentioned in the past how E105 Zeta's lower half contains several Sega Dreamcast consoles, what's also interesting is that Zeta is the fifth unit in Eggman's E100 series, and the Dreamcast was Sega's fifth major home console. Additionally, E101 Beta, Eggman's first non-prototype E100 robot, had a revision called E101 Mark II. This parallels Sega's first major home console, the SG-1000, which also had a revision commonly referred to as the Mark II. Eggman's aide Orbot didn't get an official name until Sonic Colors, as he was never mentioned by name before this. He was given the title Ergo by fans due to the character's frequent use of the word ergo. However, in the Sonic Unleashed game script given to Archie Comics writer Ian Flynn, he was supposedly named SA-55. This early name is Leet speak for sass, which refers to his overall sassy behavior. In the Archie comics, Cubot is also given the serial number IDI-07, meaning idiot in Leet speak. These aren't the only villainous Eggman robots with an interesting history. Sonic Mania director Christian Whitehead came up with the hard-boiled heavies while imagining Eggman entering a state of depression after the events of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles. Whitehead envisioned Eggman at home, lounging around in his pajamas. During this time, the abandoned Egg Robos would go a little mad, resulting in the events of Sonic Mania. In many of Sonic Mania's game files, the Heavy Magician is referred to as Heavy Mystic. Additionally, Sonic Mania programmer Simon Thomley accidentally called the character Heavy Mystic instead of Heavy Magician during a livestream. This seems to indicate that the character's name was changed from Heavy Mystic to Magician some point during production. The Heavies also have a few audio Easter eggs. The Heavy Shinobi uses sound effects from Sega's The Revenge of Shinobi on Genesis. and the Heavy Rider uses sounds from Sonic's Spinball. The sound effect that plays when Heavy Magician emerges from their box's fang, bean, or bark was originally used as an effect for losing rings in 8-bit Sonic titles. This is likely a reference to the game Fang first appeared in, Sonic Triple Trouble for the Game Gear. Fang was also planned to appear as a boss in the cancelled Saturn game Sonic Extreme. In several magazine screenshots, Fang was shown to be unusually large compared to Sonic, as was Metal Sonic. Because the game was cancelled, Fang never made his appearance. In the early stages of Sonic Heroes, Fang was also planned to appear as a playable character. He would have been on a team with Bean and Bark. Sonic Unleashed maybe also has an obscure reference within it. Dark Gaia may be inspired by the second form of the final boss in the Super Nintendo game Terranigma, which is also named Dark Gaia. Both foes have snake-like bodies, wide heads, and an aura emanating from their back. This reference would likely have been lost on many North American fans, as Terranigma only released in Japan and PAL regions. Did you know? Rather than the iconic villain we know today, Dr. Eggman was first conceived as a protagonist. In 1990, Sega's in-house development team, AM8, were tasked with creating a mascot to rival Nintendo's Mario. They experimented with several concepts before finally choosing one of Yuji Naka's ideas, a character that could curl into a ball to smash through obstacles. It was around this time that Sega hit upon the simple idea of making an egg-shaped character. Artist Naoto Oshima's original sketch was close to Dr. Eggman's eventual design, besides the polka dot pajamas. He was also made circular, so he was easy for children to draw. The team were fond of the character and kept the sketch even after they'd moved on with a different hero design. As the protagonist's role had been filled, they decided to recast this egg character as the villain. Eggman's iconic mustache, glasses, and grin bear a strong resemblance to Theodore Roosevelt, 26th President of the United States. That said, it's unknown if this was intentional or a simple coincidence. Eggman was also intended to embody industrial development, to rival Sonic's environmental themes. Ironically, Roosevelt was himself an environmentalist. He created wildlife sanctuaries throughout the US and founded the National Conservation Commission. When Sonic Adventure released in the West, fans were surprised by some of the game's canonical differences to the rest of the series. The villain they knew as Dr. Robotnik had been renamed Dr. Eggman, and Sonic now lived on Earth as opposed to Planet Mobius. The reasons behind these changes go back to 1991, when Sonic the Hedgehog was being prepared for release in America and Europe. Sega of America were given very little information on the Japanese story, and wrote their own account of the Sonic world known as the Sonic Bible. The Sonic Bible was an attempt to fill gaps in the story, and was rewritten several times. One early draft cast Sonic as a normal hedgehog in Nebraska, whose father had drowned in a poisoned pond. While the setting would change drastically throughout the drafting stages, Robotnik's origin story remained largely the same. The story says he was once the selfless scientist Dr. Ovi Kintobor, who attempted to rid the planet of pollution by drawing all of the world's evil into the Chaos Emeralds. Unfortunately, a freak accident caused Kintobor to fuse with the evil energy and a rotten egg, transforming him into Dr. Ivo Robotnik. The Sonic Bible was never released publicly, but the story was still considered canon by Sega's divisions in America and Europe. It even became the foundation for tie-in publications like Stay Sonic and Sonic the Comic. The name Dr. Ivo Robotnik itself was suggested by Dean Sitton, a game counselor at Sega of America. As one of Sonic's earliest playtesters at Sega of America, Sitton would often be asked to join brainstorming sessions for new storylines and character names. Sitton suggested many names, including Mr. Bad Wrench, Mr. Bad Year, Dr. Bad Vibes, Nasty McRotten, and Fatty Lobotnik before Robotnik's final name. The name Ivo was chosen because it vaguely sounds like evil, and had multiple secrets hidden within it. The word spelled backwards is Ovi, which references the doctor's original name before fusing with a rotten egg, and the Latin prefix for egg, Ovi. It might seem like the name Robotnik was derived from the word robot, but it's actually the other way around. The 1920s play by Karl Čapek, titled Rossum's Universal Robots, was the first recorded use of the word robot in the English language. It referred to a subclass of synthetic people made to be slaves. The word was coined by Čapek's brother, and was derived from Robotnik, the Czech word roughly meaning servant or slave. The word robot would go on to become a widely used term for man-made automatons. Sitton heard the term Robotnik and thought it was a good fit for the character. The Sonic Bible was considered canon until Sonic Adventure released in 1999, when the Japanese continuity was adopted worldwide. To address the confusion surrounding Eggman's name, his two names were combined into one. Yuji Naka explained in an interview that Dr. Ivo Robotnik was the character's real name, with Eggman being an insulting nickname used by Sonic & Company. Sega had already done something similar in the series, combining two potential names for Sonic's sidekick into Miles Tails Prower. This compromise is only true for Western audiences, however, as the name Dr. Robotnik has never been officially adopted in Japan. According to Eggman's Sonic Channel profile, his real name is unknown, but some references to the name Robotnik have slipped through the cracks. In the Japanese version of Sonic Adventure 2, Eggman's grandfather is called Gerald Robotnik, and the words Robotnik Empire can be seen in the background of a cutscene. The Sonic Triple Trouble level Robotnik Winter also retains its name in Japan. Dr. Eggman's name wasn't the only thing that changed between continuities. The character's appearance was completely altered for the first animated Sonic adaptation, The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. Animator Milton Knight was responsible for Robotnik's redesign, interpreting him as the perfect image of self-love. Robotnik's narcissism manifested as a focus on sex appeal, which was used for comic effect. Animators began drawing attention to his bottom in particular, leading Knight to claim that he was animation's sexiest fat man. The writers soon picked up on the joke, finding excuses to dress Robotnik up in different outfits. Robotnik was recreated in order to make him more expressive, with Knight instructing the show's animators to defy conventional wisdom and go off-model if they thought it would make a scene funnier. The design change became the template for much of Robotnik's merchandising in the West, which resulted in some confusion. For example, different versions of Sonic Spinball have a different Robotnik on their covers. The Genesis version features the original Eggman design, but the Game Gear version featured the cartoon Robotnik. The game Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine was simply a reskinned Puyo Puyo for the Sega Genesis. This version of Robotnik was redesigned yet again for Sonic's second animated series known as SAT-AM. In 1993, Dr. Cliff Tabin discovered a protein essential to embryo development in many animals, including humans. This protein was named Sonic Hedgehog at the request of Dr. Robert Riddle, after his 6-year-old daughter brought a copy of Sonic the Comic back from England. The name attracted outrage from members of the scientific community. Many of Tabin's collaborators hated the name, having grown up in Liverpool where Sonic was a slang term for groovy. And more seriously, many scientists felt the name trivialized an important protein and gene. The gene was linked to several serious conditions, and it would be inappropriate to tell a parent that their child's illness involves Sonic Hedgehog. However, the name stuck, and when a molecule was found that potentially inhibited the Sonic Hedgehog gene, it was named Robotnikinin, in honor of Sonic's arch-nemesis. Despite supposedly having an IQ of over 300, Dr. Eggman is often portrayed as a clumsy buffoon. In the 1996 Sonic movie, this was done to show a more human side to the character in spite of his evil deeds.